Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mesa City Council study session for the morning of April the 4th. All of our council is present. First item on our agenda, item 1A, is a presentation and discussion on the Transit Department's budget and an update on the Transit Shade Study. Jody, David, nice to have you here.
Morning, Mayor, Council. My name is Jody Sorrell, and I'm the Transit Services Director. And to my left is David Calloway. He's one of our transit coordinators in our department. Just quickly reviewing our public purpose, which simply put is providing transit options to support mobility and economic vitality for the city. So we like to help people move using public transit. Our objectives really focus on supporting that purpose, which is to enhance mobility options, offer safe and affordable transit options, and address the needs of our vulnerable populations by providing services. We're going to talk about 4 performance metrics today, and they're all ridership based, so we can see how our transit ridership is performing in the city. Just as a note, our ridership data we get from Valley Metro, and it usually lags 30 days behind. So these are January numbers, not February. We don't have the most recent yet. So in January, we carried 189,000. We did 189,000 transit trips on bus. And this graph, we expect this graph to be kind of flatlined now for the next, for the short term. Part of that is we've got our system now to where pretty much everything is a 30-minute frequency. And a 30-minute frequency is really not what we should strive for. We should strive for a 15-minute frequency. 50% of the trips in the valley are transfer trips. So if you have to have a 30-minute frequency and you have to make that transfer and you don't know if the bus is coming in 5 minutes or 25 minutes, it's more of a deterrent sometimes to taking it than not. The other part is cities are hesitant to put out additional funding to add that service because Prop 400 sunsets at the end of 2025, and our future funding with 479 is still it's unsure at this point. So we expect this to be fairly flatlined until some of that stuff resolves.
Jody, I have a quick question for you to leave this graph. This is all post-COVID, obviously.
Yes.
What have we recovered where we were in terms of ridership?
We've recovered about 70%, 75% of our transit ridership from COVID in this. So we're still like 30%. What's not recovering from COVID is the express bus service. That is still probably down 70% of what it was before COVID. And a lot of that is a lot of the larger businesses in downtown have not brought their workers back. The state of Arizona had 500,000 square feet of office space in downtown Phoenix, and they gave that up during COVID. And the largest express bus riders are typically state employees, county employees, and City of Phoenix employees because they tend to be the largest employers in that area. So our express bus is really not coming back, but our local bus is coming back slowly.
And is that also true of light rail?
Light rail, yes. I think light rail is coming back at about a little higher, faster pace for us than bus. But light rail has the advantage, again, of being 15-minute service where our buses is 30-minute frequency. So that also impacts some of that ridership. So we'll talk about the light rail ridership now. In January, we did 158,000 trips on light rail. And that's important to note, that's 158,000 trips in about a 5.5-mile span in Mesa. So unlike the bus, which has a much larger reach within our community, light rail is very concentrated to within a 5.5-mile corridor. This is our accessible transit ridership, and it's doing what we want it to do, which is our ride choice trips are about twice as many, 63% of our accessible transit trips than our paratransit trips. In 2019, we realigned our paratransit service area to be within the federal minimum, and So we were no longer offering paratransit citywide. We offered it within 3/4 miles of a bus route or transit stop, but we offer Ride Choice citywide. Ride Choice is more of a commercial service where people can call one number and get a cab, get an Uber, get a Lyft, or some other vehicle. And we made that decision in 2019 because at that point, a paratransit trip was about $45 a trip. And our Ride Choice trip was about $15 a trip. So we knew long-term that that was going to be financially challenging. And we made that choice at the right time because now Ride Choice, or our paratransit trips are looking to be about $75 a trip, where our Ride Choice trips are about $40 a trip. So we didn't expect inflation to go that quick, but we're seeing the benefits of this is what we want it to do. When you look at our financial summary for the last couple of years, I do want to point out the fiscal year 22-23 actuals for Light Rail. Light Rail, that fiscal year, we still had some American Rescue Plan funds to use, so that offset our contribution for Light Rail. Had we not had those funds, our Light Rail actuals would have been closer to about $15 million. So I just didn't want anybody to question why we went from 9 million to 17 million on up. So everything else in our budget is pretty stable year over year with service levels being what they are. This is always a
Oh, I'm
help-
sorry, Jody.
I'm sorry.
I do have a question on the administrative services. I did notice those went down.
Yeah, those went down, but they went down because we got a grant from the federal government for a TOD planning study for the streetcar,
Okay.
proposed streetcar corridor. Those funds were originally in Transit's budget. During this fiscal year, we transferred them to planning's budget because planning is managing that grant. So
Okay.
that's why that went down.
Okay.
So this is the value. Lots of times when we see what we pay out of our budget for transit, we get a lot more value for transit because of the regional sales tax. So we always put this slide in to show really the amount of service the net value, I want to say, of the service that we're putting out there. So this year, that total is about $54 million worth of service, and about just over 31 million of that comes from the Prop 400 funding. So it's a very critical source of funding for us. In this year's budget, we are requesting a contract specialist position to help us maintain our bus shelters and our transit facilities. In 2015, Transit started taking over and managing the cleaning contracts for that directly. And at that point, we had about 230 bus shelters, 2 transit centers, and 4 park and rides. We've added a transit center. We're up to about 300 bus shelters. We've also added a transit advertising contract to the mix, and that's some additional work that needs to go to manage that. And by 2027, if projections hold 2027, we'll say maybe 2028, we'll have another 450 bus shelters that need to be managed, and that's a little bit beyond what just one person can manage by themselves. So this position, if approved, would be contingent upon the passing of 479. So we would know we would have a funding source moving forward.
Can you describe what amount of maintenance or upkeep do we provide to bus shelters? Is that a daily power wash or a weekly, or just because there are some bus shelters in town that are arguably urban campsites?
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering how often does someone come in and clean that out?
Sure, Mayor Giles. We have a cleaning contractor that visits our bus shelters at least twice a week. And that twice a week service usually includes picking up ground trash, emptying the trash cans, and 1 pressure wash. The pressure washing frequency and the cleaning frequency kind of vary depending on the usage of the bus stop. Like, for example, you alluded to some that are used a little bit more heavily. Some stops we do visit 4 to 5 times a week, almost daily. So we do hit those higher usage bus stops pretty frequently. So it kind of varies throughout the city, but our basic level of service is we visit each bus shelter twice a week.
Thank you.
So then this slide summarizes the funding for that position, which would be 110,000 of one-time funding and then around 102,000 ongoing to fund that position. And then the other part of this presentation is to talk about the shade study and the growth of our transit shelter program. And so that is going to be, we're going to let David talk about that since he's the expert in that area.
So we put out that number to you of about 450 bus shelters by 2027 or 2028. And that shows the growth from about this time. In FY22, we were actually granted funding to do a bus stop shade study to evaluate existing shade levels at each bus stop that didn't have a shelter. And that looked at about 682 bus stops. And we found that currently 68% of our stops are shaded either from a bus shelter, which is an obvious source of shade. And then we found some that had 192 stops that were shaded from some other source, and that could be a tree, a building, some adjacent vegetation, things like that. The reason we wanted to look at that was to see where we could implement adding new bus shelters where it was more appropriate to get that maximum shade coverage. So as you can see here in FY22, we had a 68% coverage, and you can kind of see the split in that graph there, with the orange being the unshaded with no shelter. And then you go to the next one. And also as part of that shade study, we worked with our consultant to design a new standard bus shelter. These are some artist renderings that you can see there on the right-hand side of the screen. There's a couple different types of shelters that we netted out of this study. One is, we call it a micro shelter, and it's small enough to be installed on the existing profile of sidewalk. So a 6-foot sidewalk can accommodate this bus shelter and still maintain ADA passage in front of it for pedestrians, as well as inside the shelter itself. It's a cantilever design, very low profile. That's excuse me, that's an issue we were running into in older parts of the city where we don't have a lot of right-of-way to add new bus shelters. So there might be a wall behind it, very narrow sidewalks. So we wanted to have an option where we could put shade where it might be a challenge. There's also, it's a scalable design. Excuse me, frog in my throat this morning. It's a scalable design, so we can actually add.
Frogs.
It's that time of year. So we can actually add components to the shelter as ridership increases. We can add additional canopies and additional seating capacity as well. And as part of that shade study, we're installing 10 prototypes throughout the city, and we're getting started on that with engineering right now. Hopefully the RFP should be hitting the streets here pretty soon for that, and hopefully we'll see those within 6 months or so on the street. And we also have some federal funding that we're looking to utilize to install up to 60 additional bus shelters, these micro shelters throughout the city. And we're going through the process of that right now, doing the environmental clearances and our work with the FTA and City of Phoenix to get that cleared.
I have a question. Thank you for that. Are these prefabricated models that are coming in, and then you can just plug and play on them and then
Yes.
expand them as needed?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, that's correct. They are prefabricated. There is a little bit of work to do on the sidewalk itself. They sit on kind of a thickened sidewalk pad, so we'd replace a few existing sidewalk panels with that thickened slab to allow for that cantilever design to be stable. So it's minimal concrete work, but the shelters themselves are prefabbed, and that's something we can essentially bolt in once the concrete is poured.
How do you determine what stops get shelters or not? Is it based on ridership, the number of riders, or?
That's correct. It is based on ridership. So after we took a look at the stops that had shade from non-shelter sources, we looked at which ones had the highest ridership that didn't have any shade and prioritized those, and then kind of worked down the list to get to that 60 mark to see where we could install these shelters. And we also did some coordination as well with looking at our priority neighborhoods for shade coverage and low-income transit propensity, things of that nature. So there's a bit of a mix of metrics we're looking at to see where we want to deploy these, but you're correct, ridership is the driving factor. We want to make sure we have the best benefit to the most amount of bus riders.
So do we have excuse me, frog in the throat. Do we have right-of-ways to put all of these in, these shelters? Because I know sometimes you were constrained by right-of-ways on certain parts of our arterial streets.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, that's correct. We do have the right-of-way to do this with, as long as we have a 6-foot wide sidewalk, which is pretty common on most of the arterial streets.
Okay.
We can install a bus shelter now. And that was the biggest hiccup getting to this point is our current standard shelter. It's very deep, perpendicular to the roadway, the concrete pad that's required. So this is much smaller and a lot easier to manage within our existing right-of-way.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I know some constituents in District 1 utilize a non-sheltered area, and when it's really hot in this bus stop area, they're standing out there in the sun, and I stop by and ask them, you know, how they're doing, and they say they're fine, just waiting for the bus, so timing is everything. So I know that they go to the bus stop at the appropriate time to get on the bus and not stand in the heat so long. So, yeah, these shelters are very important, and thank you for doing that based on the ridership.
Thank you. And here you can see kind of our growth up through 2027, 2028. There's quite a big jump within the next year or two here, and that'll increase up through 2027. And once we add these additional shelters, that'll get us to around that 450 mark, and we'll increase our shade coverage at bus stops to 92% coverage. And that is with bus shelters and non-shelter sources of shade that were identified in that shade study. I do want to add a caveat, though, to that shade study metric, the non-shelter sources of shade. That's something we're going to evaluate over time because things change, you know, buildings might be torn down, rebuilt, vegetation changes out there on the street. So this is kind of a dynamic number, but this is our best estimate based on what we're working on as far as our additional shelters and then working with transportation CIP projects to add bus shelters as we do roadway reconstruction projects as well.
Frankie?
The ones that you've identified that we cannot put shelter, is there something else that we can put? I know we put some, like, lean bars or some seats and some where I think based on the numbers, we won't be able to put a shelter in every stop, but is there other means that the study identified to provide some relief for people waiting in some of these bus shelters that won't have shade?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Heredia, that's kind of a second step that we're looking at outside of the shade study that we'll say that's version 2.0, is looking at what other options we have to get to those locations where we wouldn't be able, or we don't plan to install a shelter. The locations where we don't plan to install a shelter currently, they're pretty low on the ridership scale. They might be stops that are at the quarter-mile, three-quarter-mile stop, you know, along a mile stretch of roadway. They might not have very good access from the neighborhood adjacent. But we are looking at the possibility of adding some, you know, potentially landscaping or things like that, depending on the ownership of the land adjacent to the bus stop. If it's something within the city's portfolio, maybe we can look at adding some sort of shade option there as well. So like I said, it's kind of an evolving process. We're not gonna just forget about those stops that we're not touching right now. That's gonna be further down the road.
I have a question for you. So it mentions in here the funding, federal grant funding, is that for the next 60? Is that where most of the funding comes from? Or you also mentioned transportation CIP?
Correct. Mayor, Councilmember Goforth. It's a mix of funding. The federal funding is, it's about $400,000 of federal funding and a $400,000 local match. The bulk of our shelters at this point are actually coming through the transportation CIP project process, which is arterial life cycle reconstruction money. So that is regional money that's used for reconstructing roadways, and transit shelters are actually part of that package.
Okay,
So
great.
that's,
If Mayor, Councilman, if I can just clarify, that federal funding is a one-time element. It's not an ongoing funding source.
Oh.
It was a congressional discretionary grant that we got through a past federal budget process.
Okay, so typically it's transportation, the
Yes.
CIP.
Typically,
life
yes.
cycle, which is, you said regional, not the local sales tax. It's usually regional
typically.
funding? Okay,
So it's about
Yeah.
400 arterial road improvement.
Improvement plans.
Right.
okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Summers.
Thank you. To that point, back on slide 8. So this talks about the local funding and then focuses on Prop 400. Prop 400 is expiring. 479, correct? 479 will be on the November ballot. If that does not pass, how is that going to impact the budget moving forward for the next fiscal year?
For fiscal year '26.
So what's the impact for this coming fiscal year and then moving forward?
But-
For example, I mean, there's not a whole lot of transit in Southeast Mesa. There's a few rides, right, and important elements. The one that concerns me the most, for example, is paratransit. It's Prop 400 funded.
Correct.
There's no local funding for that, but there are a number of retirement communities that exist out there. So I suspect if we had a heat map of paratransit use, there'd be a lot of that use. Sunline Village East, Sunline Springs, and some of those other communities are going to be impacted. So just as a broad question, how do we see if Prop 479 doesn't pass, how's that going to impact your budget?
Well, if Prop 479 doesn't, so Prop 400 is set to sunset December 31st, 2025. So it wouldn't necessarily impact this fiscal year budget. It would impact fiscal year '26's budget. And if it doesn't pass, we will have to regroup as a region to figure out the best, what we can do and what we can't do and what it looks like. So it would be devastating, but we haven't got to that point to start figuring out the doomsday scenario quite yet.
Yeah, and it's not included in any scenario of forecasting for
Yeah.
us. Because to absorb $30 million ongoing
It's going to be problematic.
would not happen, would be
Correct.
impossible, right? And so you would have to come back, we'd have to come back, and most likely you would do some, you would have to figure out how much of this you could absorb, but it would be a fraction of this. Ironically, light rail would continue to run because it's fully funded locally.
Right. Okay, and then transportation will be next, so maybe.
But transportation doesn't fund transit.
We're not a 400.
Yeah, because there's streets,
Okay,
there's
so
street maintenance.
Streets is the one we'll want to hear from,
Yeah.
a discussion about that as well. All right, that would be my concern, but obviously it's not going to be this fiscal year, so we don't
Right,
have
so
to
we'd
have that discussion. So thank you for
We'd have
that.
a year to,
We have a year to figure it out, should that happen, but it's important that, for anybody listening, to take a look at what it means in Prop 479. There are things people like, things people don't, but the elements such as, well, like city manager said, light rail is not part of that here in Mesa.
right.
What is part of this is the transit service, the paratransit services, and that is an essential service for people trying to go to a store, trying to go to the hospital, doctor's appointments, that type of thing. And I fear if we cut back on paratransit services in any way and we can't provide that service, that's going to be a burden on the fire department. It's going to, social services are going to, you just see how this rolls downhill. So I just ask everybody to take a look at this proposition. We have to have that conversation too about things that are important in my district, like improvements to the SR 24 and roadways out there that are funded by this 479. So I just wanted to bring that up. I am pleased, however, that it's not going to impact the budget for the coming year. Thank you.
Okay. I think, are we done?
I think that was it.
Okay. So now that I've totally had fun with the PowerPoint here.
This is the best slide.
We all have it.
Thank you. Yeah, we have it. Does anybody have any other questions for?
I have one more. So we received a summary from Mike Kennington, and it talked about essentially your contract services, your costs have risen about $3 million. Is that reflected in this? Where do I?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Part of what's happened is just timing wise, because we buy our service from Valley Metro, and Valley Metro contracts that service out. In the last, I have to think, in the last few months, Valley Metro, we have issued new contracts, and they've started for both paratransit, ride choice, and fixed route bus. And so those cost increases are reflected in the '25 budget estimates.
Okay.
So yes, the light rail contracts will be coming up, will be redone probably for going into fiscal year '26. So we will see some changes. They'll do a procurement probably this next year for that, for the light rail operation. So we'll probably see some increased costs with that.
Okay. Great.
Francisco.
Hey, Jody, where's the discussion around microtransit? I know that it's been gaining popularity. We do have some neighborhood connectors that have been very well successful in the west side and downtown. But there's opportunities, I think, it's based on location and where you place these micro transit options. So given it, I think we can't stop planning. We have to be looking out towards the future. But given if things remain the same, what are the opportunities to look into these micro transit options, maybe in Southeast Mesa, or I know we're furthering study along micromobility in downtown and a couple other options. So is there any thoughts there of how do we move forward?
There, Mayor, Vice Mayor Heredia, there is, in the Transit Master Plan, we've identified at least 2 areas that are potentials for either a microtransit or a neighborhood circulator type program. There's probably a third that we could probably do. I think what we're kind of at is waiting. Again, we don't want to come forward with new services, because the reality is there's nothing transit does that I can come to you for less than $1 million, $1.5 million. So until we know what our funding source going forward is in November, then we can start putting together, we have some plans to, either through, in Prop 479, there's an emerging markets funding pot we could apply for some of that for, to put that out there. So that's kind of the plan in looking at what happens in November, and then how do we move forward, and are we ready? And that was part of the whole goal of the Transit Master Plan, is to put us into a position where we were ready to maximize all the elements of Prop 479 if it were to pass.
Makes sense. All right.
Just to put a bow on this, Jody, it sounds like the regional transportation plan that's to be funded by Proposition 479 really is on hold pending that election. So when people come to you and me and say, hey, we need expanded bus routes in Southeast Mesa and South Mesa, the response is, well, we have a plan for that, but we can't implement it yet because we don't, until November, whether we know if the voters go up or down. So stay tuned.
That's a pretty close yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because we can't, there's still some money in Prop 400, but we're hesitant to put new service out there should 479 fail, and then we have to take it right back. That's not fair for anybody that relies on that transit. So we're kind of in a holding pattern and status quo until we see what happens in November, and then we can really start moving one way or another.
I think, Mayor, one way to educate individuals, I mean, even though we do pay a fraction of the fixed bus routes, I think the opportunities to share with everyone is that really buses are paid for regionally, or funded, the funding comes regionally. And because you think about it, they serve regional purposes. So in order for us to continue, we need that regional funding to continue. And so I think that's the way to kind of share with individuals. It's not just a city thing, it's a regional perspective and a regional funding source that we rely upon for bus transit.
And another common question I get on this is, I don't like light rail, so I'm going to vote against 479. And what's wrong with that argument?
Won't have any effect.
479 came through the legislature where there was an anti-light rail bias,
Right.
and so 479 does not fund light rail.
479 does not fund light rail, and 400 doesn't neither 400 nor 479 are going to fund light rail operations and maintenance. So the actual operating of that system comes from the three cities themselves, either through Tempe and Phoenix have a local sales tax that they fund it for, and we fund it out of our general fund. So if you don't want to, if you don't like light rail and don't want to fund 479, it will have no effect on light rail whatsoever.
And in effect, the legislature has, through the legislation passed prohibits the expansion, the construction expansion of light rail with the regional sales tax. Now, it could be done with other sources, but it can't be, so that's already been taken care of by the legislature. The operations will continue. Again, that's kind of this, I don't know how to say, irony of all this is those who don't like light rail vote against 479, and then light rail will be the only public transit running after if 479 fails. So, because it's locally funded, the operations of what's already built, that's already will continue. It's the bus, paratransit, and ride choice that'll be most impacted. And then, of course, all the other
All your bus
arterial,
Right.
freeway, all that, that's where the real big, the larger dollars are.
Jen?
I'd just like to add on to a lot of, I've heard comments from people who said, well, I don't use the light rail or I don't use the bus, therefore I don't want my taxpayer dollars to go towards that, whether it's locally or at, regionally. But I say, even though you don't use it, without it, it affects your life. Because we have a lot of workers who use public transit to get to and from work. And without that transit, they'll be forced into other means of trying to make it to work, which might include owning a car. Owning a car brings more congestion, and it'll bring inflation if there's more, if they have to seek more expensive options for transportation. And then here we go again with the cost of everything that we do. So even though you don't participate in taking the bus or a light rail, it affects your life if people who are working are using it and not able to get to where they go. So I just want people to realize the ecosystem of what we have in our transportation system.
Mayor Giles, Councilmember Duff, if I could just add on to that. When we talked about our performance metrics, that was just about 360,000 transit trips that were taken in Mesa in 1 month. Those trips are going to have to go somewhere. They may go into a car on the street. I mean, they're going to go somewhere, and it's going to affect everybody with all those trips.
I have a question about the streetcar. I know that study's been funded, is federally funded. What, the next step on that, though, where can that
The
funding come from?
streetcar, we are in the process of, right now, partnering with Tempe and Valley Metro to do what's called to develop a locally preferred alternative for the streetcar extension. And we're just getting started with that. We've been working on that study for about 6 months. We're going to be starting in the next couple months, going out and doing the outreach for that. That phase of the study is locally funded between Tempe and Mesa to move that, to kind of see what that preferred alternative is. It doesn't commit us to take it any further. It just identifies which alignment is endorsed by both Mesa and Tempe, should they streetcar.
And Jody, what are you calling that initiative?
It's the alternatives analysis. Yeah.
So for the community, what do you call it? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, that's the phase of the study. It's this project itself is the Rio East Dobson streetcar extension.
And you're looking at funding sources. That's what the study is trying to determine. For expansion or for
No,
what?
go ahead,
No.
Jody.
The study will identify a corridor, so it will
Right.
identify if we
Which
take.
route?
Which route it goes. So does it go down Rio Salado to Dobson to Main Street?
Oh, I thought that was the federally funded study.
No, we
Oh,
don't,
okay.
we don't have, the federal funded is, that we have, the grant we got is to do transit-oriented development, land use planning.
Okay.
For a corridor. So let me back up. We have identified a streetcar possible alignment in Mesa that would go Dobson south to Southern, Southern to Country Club, and Country Club back up to Main Street. So we applied for a federal grant to do some TOD planning for that corridor, because when you get to, should the Rio East move forward to construction, we'd have to apply for a federal grant. The federal government has 6 different criteria that they rate a project on, and compatible land use is one of those. So this grant helps put us, should it move forward, in a more competitive position to leverage tens of millions of dollars for that project. Because we've already,
It's recognizing, and you, the two of you will get this very much, it's land use and transportation are married together. So we're doing that assessment. So that helps us. And we have to do the assessment before we can really get into the competition or the
Right.
application for the federal funds. We have to show them there is that compatibility with these
Okay.
types of
yeah,
uses.
there's 6, like ridership, land use, accessibility, I can't remember the other 3, but it's all working, so the project's just not randomly going willy-nilly, like the FTA is funding a project that will be transformative or be successful in the neighborhood. So that's what the federal grant's for.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
All right, any additional questions, council? Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda, item 1B, is a presentation and discussion on the Transportation Department's budget.
Transportation, we should have checked on colors, I guess, before we showed up this morning. I said long sleeve and collars, I didn't specify what color. You're not, I'm not the guy you want fashion advice from, believe me.
Oh, Jim got the memo.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is RJ Zeter with the Transportation Department. With me is Orlando Otero, Jordan Carlisle, and Eric Guderian. As always, please ask questions as we dive into our proposed budget for FY 24-25. Our public purpose is plan, design, operate, and maintain a safe, efficient, multimodal transportation system. Pretty straightforward when you read it, but there's a lot that goes into that. Our first priority, of course, is to maintain the infrastructure that we have. Second is to promote safety and identify potential safety improvements and increase efficiency and capacity for all users of our roadways. Under the safety category, I will note, I hope you're aware that we did receive a $750,000 federal grant under the Safe Streets for All program. And that is underway. We are in the data gathering phase, and we've had at least one presentation to the Transportation Advisory Board, and we will be having conversations with the Sustainability and Transportation Committee of the Council as this project moves forward, and that is to identify potential safety projects across the city. So step one is completing the plan, because you need the plan to then be able to apply for future federal grants for a number of projects. And then last, we will also be talking about environmental sustainability that our department has undertaken. So I'm going to turn this over to Orlando, and he's going to talk a little bit about our pavement condition across the city.
Good morning. I'm going to go over a few of the performance measures that we track in the Transportation Department. Like RJ mentioned, the first one I'm going to go over is All Streets PCI. So industry standard
That's
is...
Pavement Condition Index.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's all right.
Pavement Condition Index, yeah.
We've got plenty of acronyms to try to...
And I'll try to remember to state the acronyms. But, okay, so industry standard is to achieve a score of 70 or greater. So you can see here in this chart that the city of Mesa, us in transportation, we're slightly above that industry standard at a score of 80.6. So this is a representation of our contractors and our in-house staff doing a tremendous job maintaining our asphalt.
One of the things I do want, oh, I'm sorry, it's on the next slide, go ahead.
All right, so every year we take on quite a bit of millings from our overlay program. And what you're seeing here is a video. So this is stored at our Center Street yard. And what you're seeing here is a video of our contractor processing these millings, okay? So these millings, we use 100% of this recycled asphalt pavement, which we refer to as RAP. And we use 90% of this recycled asphalt in our slurry seal application. Now, the remaining 10% is also used either for backfill or dust mitigation. So if I had mentioned it before, again, we use 100% of this process millings in a sense. Okay? So the next slide you see here is the different types of pavement preservation that we utilize at the City of Mesa. The first one is a seal coat application. Typically, we apply a seal coat application on newer roadway with a PCI greater than 70. What a seal coat is basically a thin layer of oil that kind of glues back the asphalt, right? And extends the life of the asphalt. The second one here is a slurry seal. Typically, we apply a slurry seal on roadways where the condition, the PCI is less than 70. Now, this is a mixture of sand and oil, and when applied to the roadway, it provides about a 1/4 inch new wear surface. And it also extends the life of the roadway. Okay, now, if we can't utilize any of our seal coat application, slurry application, the last resort is an overlay where we come in and we'll mill the top layer of our asphalt and then apply a 2-inch layer of new asphalt, which resets our PCI back to 100 and kind of restarts our pavement preservation process. Okay,
Quick question.
okay.
I know there's been talks on innovation on pavement and seal coating or heat mitigation on our roadways. You know, cities have gone into testing, different types of materials. Where are we at in that process? Have we identified anything that makes sense cost-wise and things that work? I know we tested materials over time, but is there any progress there? You know, we get emails from companies and other folks, and, the City of Phoenix did some heat mitigation in some neighborhoods around, cool pavements. There's been mixed results there, I think, as far as land, like the air to roadway heat.
Yes, Mayor,
comparisons.
Vice Mayor, we have tested a couple of different products. We're watching very closely what Phoenix is doing with their Cool Seal. The first product we applied is in our parking lot at our 6th Street facility, and I'd welcome you to come over and take a look at it. It's not held up well at all. Okay. It almost immediately started to break up and flake. It just wasn't, and Phoenix ran into that trouble in some of their neighborhoods. We've also tested a second product in a different section, but of the same parking lot, and we're evaluating that over time. The immediate issue is that those materials are 4 to 5 times more expensive than the materials we currently use. So it's this sort of balance that, do we use those materials, but then we can cover less surface area, or do we, continue the approach that we have? There's also some data, and I think you referred to it, that the benefit of the Cool Seal is at nighttime because it's urban heat island and, it's reflecting, in theory, reflecting the heat off the pavement better. I've read some material that suggests that during the day, though, it actually makes the streets hotter for people that are crossing because it's reflecting the heat, and at 3 to 4 feet above the asphalt, you're walking across an intersection, you're actually picking that up during the day. So, long story, but it is something we continue to watch. On Orlando's team is a very dedicated pavement management supervisor who is always looking at new technologies. We actually are part of the Southwest Asphalt Consortium. We're going to be doing a test project, not for this application, but looking at new ways to extend the life of our streets.
Is that a curious, is the seal coating, slurry seal mostly in-house or contract-based?
It is, Mayor, Vice Mayor, it is a mix.
Mix, okay.
We do have in-house staff, but we do the bulk of our work with contracts. And there's different applications or different types of seal coats depending on the condition of the roadway, and some more expensive than others. And that's why what Orlando talked about, the key is to get into the street when it's young, you know, by putting that first layer of seal coat down that's relatively inexpensive, you're buying more time before you go to the next step, you know, which is slurry seal. And then, of course, the last step is in overlay, you know, and, you know, we doubled, you all approved increasing our overlays budget from $10 to $20 million. Unfortunately, with cost increases, we're not getting twice as much, you know, repaving, but we have significantly added. So we're spending probably, round numbers, about $35 million a year on pavement preservation between what Orlando's team does and what we work through the engineering department on.
And do the vendors have access to the milling portions on the center, or how does that work?
They do. Those millings are used primarily on our arterial roadways, and yes, our contractors does have access to those millings. We supply the millings. We supply.
But I'm really proud of our.
Or the sand, I should say, used.
I'm really proud of our staff because previously a lot of that material could have gotten landfilled. And so we're literally using 100% of what comes off the streets is going back onto a different street.
I'll just add, is that saving us money by doing that?
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, absolutely. Virgin sand is up to a little over $30 a ton. And when we process this millings to sand, it's costing us about $15 a ton.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, moving on. Eric, let's talk about traffic signal response.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. One of our important performance measures is how quickly we respond to traffic signal trouble calls, and that's when a traffic signal goes into flash, whether that's for mechanical reasons or a storm comes through and power is knocked out. Our response time should be within an hour, and that's even at nights and weekends. We always have at least one staff member on call. Our performance measure is 95% within that hour time. We're back up above that, and we haven't been over the past couple of years. We've had a really hard time filling positions. What we've done is, instead of hiring experienced traffic signal technicians, we've created a trainee position and brought in staff that we could train. And over the past couple of years, we've been able to fill all those positions now, and we have our staff trained up, and it's been really successful. It was a hard couple of years, but I'm happy to say that we think our group is in a stronger position because of that training position now.
So your trivia question for today is to guess how many traffic signals we have in Mesa. 501.
Yeah, we just took a picture at when we celebrated the 500s, right?
Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Moving on, talking a little bit about sustainability, and Orlando will go into a little bit more detail, but we do support the city's climate action plan. And we've done that. We've come to you several times. We'll talk at another slide about streetlights, but I wanted Orlando to talk a little bit about what we're doing with our landscape refurbishment program.
Okay, so thank you, RJ. Part of our landscape refurbishment program is turf conversion. Similar to parks, we have a lot of ornamental turf out there that we're trying to replace. Here's a good example of an area where we converted the turf. Now, when we go in there and install the new landscape, we're replacing the turf with low water usage vegetation, DG, a new irrigation infrastructure, and upgrading either the controller that's on site to a smart controller or installing a new smart controller. One thing to note here is that wherever we can, we are trying to plant as many trees as we can. And now there's some things that prevent us from doing that. But again, I just want to emphasize where we can, we are planting trees. We are projected to plant over 500 trees with our landscape refurbishment program.
Orlando, may I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So, sorry, Mayor, I just jumped in without.
The enthusiasm is good to see. Yeah.
So when you remove the turf and put in trees and kind of re-landscape an area, are we taking any measures to do more of a bioswale or some way to absorb water, like when it rains, that you're bringing in the water there so it doesn't keep on draining to the street, so plants that you're creating
Mayor, Councilmember Duff,
Yeah.
we are not adding any type of bioswale. We're not trying to capture any water. With that, there's an environmental component that goes to it, if, you know, where we would have to treat the water for mosquitoes or things like that. So at this time, we're not doing anything by adding bioswales or trying to capture the rainwater.
What we are doing is trying to reduce the amount of water we're using.
Yes.
And so, one, changing the plant type to a more xeriscape type material, but also by upgrading the irrigation systems, we're putting in what are called smart controllers that are much more efficient, and we can also see leaks remotely. We can certainly explore, you know, we have done bioswales, as you know, on some of our capital projects. I'm open to looking for opportunities if there
Yeah,
are.
we've done that on the larger scales where
Yes.
they can serve our regional purpose, all along Southern. We've done it along First.
Light rail on Main Street.
Yeah, so
For
we,
those opportunities to
we
absorb
keep,
for the plants and
when we
for-
have that kind of
Sure.
right of way and that opportunity, we like doing it. It makes a difference. I think a lot of times the right of way they're addressing is kind of snugged up between the sidewalk and a privacy wall, and we're just trying to dress up those areas. And so I think I think that for us is the idea that, one, we're beautifying the area, we're refurbishing the old landscaping that's gotten very tired. We're putting in smart
Controllers.
sorry, thank you. It's not smart meters. And really trying to add a lot more trees and vegetation. And you'll notice it especially too now, I think where I'm noticing it is not along the sides, but down the medians. We're really trying to address the medians because some of them just look really aged and old, and trying to put, you know, it's okay to have some vegetation. We just got to pick the right kind and put it inside these medians.
Yeah. So looking for those opportunities where we can absorb some water in those right-of-ways would be great, because traditionally, we've designed to sweep all the water off of those landscape areas into the stormwater, and the trees struggle, or plants struggle to get enough water here. So looking for those opportunities to absorb some of that rainwater when we get it, to not in a collection point that would be deep enough to be a hazard, but enough to just create a little bit of more absorption time for those plants. We've done it out here, and like you said, a
I
number of
think
places.
we see opportunities. with
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So I just want to
Yeah.
encourage that.
Yeah.
I have something else, but, okay, that's enough for now. Thanks.
So I noticed that, so the turf conversion, you still have a significant amount remaining that you've identified. Do you have any identified for the non-turf refurbishment?
We also do, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, we also do refurbishment projects, as Mr. Brady alluded to, where just landscaping's gotten tired.
Right.
You know, so it's and that's a good description,
way.
actually, you know. Plants die, you know, a lot of it, again, goes back to what you don't see, which is the irrigation systems have, you know, exceeded their life expectancy.
So have you already identified that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You just didn't.
Orlando has a dedicated team and a couple of employees that are very passionate, actually,
Yeah.
about the work that they do, and they're very creative. You know, we could show you a number of examples across the city of before and afters, you know,
So
and
is
at
it a
relatively low
significant-
cost.
Oh, yeah.
Amount?
Oh, across the city?
Yeah. Is it a
there's
lot? Okay.
A lot to be
I'm
done.
just
There
kinda
is,
curious
yes.
how
Yeah.
much.
So we've actually increased this budget. If you look at that slide, you know, we had 500,000 a couple years ago. Now we've got a budget of $1 million. We actually augmented that last fiscal year with some funds that were unused on another project that took that up to 1.4 million. So we really are trying to, I say to our staff that the aesthetic of our system is just as important as the asphalt itself. So it's not just this utilitarian, cold, you know, asphalt
Yeah.
concrete.
I'm glad to hear you're planting trees where you can. I think,
Oh, yeah.
you know, that's beneficial for many reasons we've already stated. The other question I have, so you and I I've had constituents that contact about erosion in their walls, and which is their responsibility, right? Probably due to water, maybe irrigation, water. Do you think some of these turf conversions will help with that? Have you identified areas where maybe it is eroding the wall?
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, I think we can certainly look at that. I think the answer to your question is yes, because when we go in and upgrade the irrigation systems, we're putting the water where it's needed. That's part of it. You know, we don't want to overwater, you know.
Right.
I think of the wall in my own backyard, I need to do some work on my irrigation system because I can see it, you know, and what that does. So we do look for those opportunities.
Do you happen to know, do we get more complaints?
We
about
get them every now
wall
and then, but it's not
in those
super.
areas where there's turf?
It's not super frequent, but we do
Okay.
get some every now and then.
Yeah.
And we go out and respond, and if we need to adjust irrigation patterns and that sort of thing, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Right, into our streetlight conversion program. So as you recall, after the master plan, we looked at contracting out streetlight LED conversions. However, after some discussion, we decided to do that in-house. By doing that in-house, we've saved the city millions of dollars. So this is a 7-year program that began in fiscal year 1920. We're about 5 years into this program, and we're about 80% converted, our light fixtures converted. So our streetlight folks have done an amazing job focusing on this conversion.
So, Mayor, and I know Councilmember Duff asked at a study session recently about our smart nodes and that sort of thing. So we are currently doing some dimming, Councilmember Goforth, in your district. The streetlight master plan allows us to do certain levels of dimming depending on what lighting zone that they're in. But I also wanted to, again, give kudos to Orlando staff that with shielding, we don't get too many complaints. Actually, in some cases, we ask people when they're getting more lights. It's not perfect. Some parts of the city, folks don't like light, or street lights. Other parts of the city, people, honestly want more. And Orlando's streetlight team does an awesome job.
And it makes, if you've ever experienced kind of this morning I did on Power Road, the transition from the changed out LED to the old.
High pressure sodium.
High pressure sodium. The clarity of color and clarity of just, it's like high definition, high resolution. And the LED versus the high sodium. It really, I think, at least, when it's dark outside and you're running in that light, it makes a big difference for everyone. So I think it's, the fact that we've been able to get this out so far across the city so quickly is really amazing. So I think it has made a big difference. And we have to be sensitive, though. There are neighborhoods who really don't want all that light. And so I think we've tried to come up with creative ways to try to deflect that. But I think where it needs to be on a street in a pedestrian way, it works out really nicely.
Let's go Julie and then.
Do you have a map of where that 20% left is that
Yes.
hasn't been?
We can actually forward a link to council. We have actually our mapping team put together, it's a toggle where you can actually look at the whole city, and we can show you across the city what we've converted.
Okay, perfect. And then all of our areas that used to be county that are now city that have just farther spaced light poles, are you guys looking at that constantly to see like where you can improve lighting or?
Mayor, Councilmember Spilsbury, we do have what we call a spot improvement program. It's not meant to be for large projects, but we do have the ability to go in if there's, sort of, 1, 2, 3 kind of infill, where there might be a dark spot. There is the potential for folks that were previously County Island properties to implement what's called a streetlight improvement district. Okay. So that would be an assessment, that folks would have to pay for. We generally don't go into neighborhoods and do wholesale installation of lights.
You'll get a split vote on that.
Well, oh, for sure. But I mean,
Yeah.
I'm talking about a specific arterial. So.
And if there's an arterial section, that might be a
That's
different
different.
animal that we can take a look at, because that's a safety issue for the roadway.
Arterials we can look at.
So please let us know where that is.
Oh,
and we'll
I
take a
have.
look. Okay.
But that's what I'm just wondering if, because so it's Power and Broadway.
Oh, okay.
So that going east on Broadway is just really dark.
Okay, I'll
And
take a
so
look.
the neighborhood right there, especially a lot of people are crossing over to the Albertsons, and so it's
Sure.
just really dark right there.
Okay.
And it used to be county, I guess, so that's
Okay,
why.
yeah, let us take a look at that.
So we received that this past week, and we're working on it.
Okay, thank you.
Alicia?
I just want to say, I appreciate that you work with the residents in my district, because I know that I have a lot who are very passionate about the night sky, and for you all to come out and look at one particular light in front of, that's shining in the back of a house. I know that takes a lot of effort, and I appreciate you working with them. It means a lot to them, and therefore to me, so.
I have a vivid memory of the public meeting we had in your district when we rolled out the master plan. It was,
That was pre-me.
it was pre you.
So
It
I have no
absolutely
idea,
was.
but I know that,
It was,
Yeah.
yes,
yeah,
a few.
yes. So anyway, thank you.
Chase.
I'll just add, we know exactly where you're doing the streetlight conversions, the new ones. because we get emails from them, because they're not used to the new light.
Oh, right, when they happen?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's dramatic.
We know where you're working at in the city, because people go, I don't like this light, what just happened? You know, but
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, it is different. You know, the color temperature is very different, but as Mr. Brady says, and this is what I strongly believe in, the light is distributed better with the LEDs, and the color rendering is better. You know, it's not that orangey, you know, you can see things better. Again, some folks like that, some folks not as much, but over time, for the amount of lights we've replaced, you know, we have about 45,000 streetlights, and if we've replaced almost 80% of them, Orlando's team does a great job at being responsive to concerns.
well, it's not only the cost savings, but it's effective light. I think the light for the safety purposes in our community is very important. So, you know, we just have to adjust to the change, that's all it is. Thanks.
Moving on to our expenditures, Chase will pick this up.
Mayor and council, this slide shows a summary of our expenditures. The right-hand column is our proposed budget for next fiscal year. Our expenditures, about 33% of them are allocated to personal services, while the other 2/3, the 67%, go towards our other services and commodities. And we have seen, as has been discussed, an increase in the costs of our contracts as well as our commodities, and that's driving some of the increase that you see in between the numbers from this year's budget to next year's budget. Included in our proposed budget is funding for 4 full-time employees for our temporary traffic control group, which we will talk about a little bit later in the presentation, as well as a couple of other adjustment requests for an increase to our herbicide contract, given the fact that our network is expanding and we have more right-of-way that we need to maintain. This next slide shows, oh, yes.
I'm sorry. Do you have a transportation planner in your department? Not an engineer, but a planner? The reason I'm asking is more looking at the role of integrating with land use and placemaking, that kind of role.
Within Eric's group, we have a transportation planning group that's actually headed by an engineer, but we do have a planning group, and they are very active at looking at new design. We are looking at joining the National Association of City Transportation Officials right now, you know, and that's where they push a lot of sort of innovative new design concepts. So that is something that Eric's team is looking at and working on right now.
Okay, so you have a committee or a group
We do.
Doing that, but no one who's like certified planner?
We do not have a land use planner on our staff, no.
Is that a consideration to have that expertise in your department?
We haven't talked about it, Councilmember. It's something
Okay.
we can explore. The team, although the leader of that group, I said, is a professional engineer, they are looking at not just the hardscape, you know, they're looking at sort of the holistic design, you know. And we've talked about this many times. Not every application works in every situation, you know, and one of the bigger challenges we have, frankly, in this part of the city is space, you know, and that's something we're trying to, you know, take a look at to see what we can do, because we're constrained. You know, when you build a new roadway, you can do, you know, many things. When you're working with development on all 4 corners and, you know, that sort of thing, it becomes more of a challenge.
I know we'll get in the conversation later because we have a presentation on the RDAs, and I think our RDAs and our attention to that is an opportunity, you know, for that placemaking that we want to create. But anyway, that's another conversation. I was just curious. Thank you.
Sure.
And Mayor and Council, before we move on, just to, hopefully it's obvious from this presentation here, but all these improvements that you're seeing, the proposed adjustments, don't affect the general fund balance, right? Because we have dollars coming in from HERF, which is the state tax.
It's gas taxes and license registrations.
And then as well as the local sales tax that we collect separately for streets. So all these improvements you're seeing here, we have capacity without having any impact on the general fund balance. So we often talk about trying to maintain those percentages. So I just want to draw your attention to that. Allows us to take on these projects without affecting the general fund.
That's a great segue, Mr. Brady, to our next slide.
Can I ask about that? So
Sure.
we anticipate that those funds are going to continue to increase to cover the additional?
Yeah,
I mean-
with the forecast of what we see in sales tax, we've been able to identify that we have capacity, even just under spending in some of the past years, we recognize we
Okay,
have
that's
the
what I was going to ask.
capacity.
And those funds are restricted?
Yeah, they're
right?
restricted for streets.
Okay. So we have sort of almost a cushion, a reserve.
We have a separate fund, if you, funding.
Yeah.
We've identified, we call it our local street sales tax. I mean, we have a specific fund that tracks the expenditures. I mean, we talk about last year when we doubled the amount for street maintenance, it came from that specific sales tax set aside. It didn't impact the general fund.
Okay.
So back in 2006, I think, the voters approved that specific additional increase in the sales
Yeah.
tax. And so we track it separately.
Okay.
It doesn't, and so it allows us to provide the funding for the staff and the funding for the materials and the equipment and everything you see here related to streets, separate and apart from the general fund.
Okay. I appreciate that distinction. I think that's important. And the fact that it sounds like we have been under.
Yeah, it's just
spending.
sometimes, you know, we budget and for 100% of what we're going to spend, and sometimes it doesn't happen. As well as in the last 3 years, or last 3 or 4 years, our sales tax has been increasing at a higher rate than we had originally estimated, so we have that
And
capacity.
then our
in there.
cost, yes.
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, what this, and this slide shows the distribution of where our revenue comes from. Again, fortunate, especially on the sales tax side, that with cost increases on capital projects, not only do these funds pay for operations, we've been able to keep some capital projects going, you know, that were originally bond, you know, funded, and use some of these resources to keep some of that stuff moving as well.
Yeah, thank you, RJ, for that. We have a significant, we're looking at the possibility of some of the projects that are funded in our previous bond programs that we even showed on the list. And because of just the inflationary costs and cost to do projects, we don't have enough capacity in the bond program to complete those projects. So we're going to have to evaluate and see if there's even capacity within the sales tax fund to cover that gap.
Can you use her funds for those capital projects?
Well, it kind of
too?
gets all mingled together.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
It goes to street maintenance broadly, but we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So just to restate this again, the Transportation Department is not impacted, does not have an impact on our general fund because it's all
You can
funded
see
from
again from this
outside
slide there,
sources?
everything that is covered, that covers the
Yeah.
needs of the Transportation Department are fully funded by sales tax, HERF funds. They have some revenues that they collect.
We have a very small amount that comes in the general fund for like parking lots.
Oh, okay.
But it's very small. I mean,
Yeah.
we're probably talking less than $500,000 a year. And we also do utility patches for the utility departments, you know, but that's, you know, a very small percentage of our budget. As you can see, you know, we're over at 83%, you know, of our funding comes from HERF and the local street tax.
So you're kind of dropping the mic on all the other departments in the city, saying.
Well, we do have
Right.
an internal saying that if, when you're in need of some street or some additional funding, we can reasonably say is related to streets, that we go talk to Uncle RJ to see if we can use some of his funds.
Okay.
I could come up with several projects that.
There's several
we
projects that
joined
he's
in
been
on.
able to help with.
Yeah, and it's fine. They're city resources.
If they're
so-
street-related
Yeah.
improvements, then we can.
We
go
connect.
from there.
That's great. I have one more quick question related to Jen's question about land planning and whether there's a land planning included in your staff. I don't want to leave the impression that we don't have land planners.
We have a lot of
working in
land
the city of
planners in the
Mesa.
planning
We have
department.
a lot of them.
Yeah.
But to what extent is there a collaboration between land planning and transportation?
Mayor, we work very closely with the Development Services Department. Eric's got 2 dedicated staff members on his team that do nothing but development plan reviews, you know, related to traffic. And I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit more, Eric.
I'd like to add that, yeah, we work with all of our departments. We work definitely with development services, not only on new development, but as we've gone through the general plan and the transportation master plan, there's been coordination. While we don't have necessarily a dedicated long-range transportation planner on our staff, many of our transportation staff have planning backgrounds came from a consulting firm that did mostly transportation planning. It's something that we keep up on and coordinate with. And a lot of our planning work is then done with that staff and through consultants as we look at projects.
We do have a transportation master plan that looks years in the future, but we don't have someone on staff that's perpetually, in perpetuity, working on that. We do it as.
Oh, they
Well, I would say, Mayor, that they really do try to implement the plan. Now, there's parts of the plan, again, it's aspirational, at some level. So, when you get down into the weeds, not everything works in every location, but they really try to keep that document as a living document, and not just something that we put on a shelf after it's completed.
The line between transportation planning and transportation engineering in the past 10 to 20 years it's a fuzzy line. You have to be able to have both aspects.
Great.
To do that.
Mr. Freeman, did you have a?
I do. What, on our local street sales tax, what derives that tax? Where do we get those monies from?
The local street sales tax?
Just like it does in the general fund.
Sales tax.
Okay.
Whatever is subject to transaction privilege tax, it's just
Okay.
3/10 of
Like the
1 cent.
TPT type?
Yeah, okay, make sure I can say this right. I'm looking at Sam and Brian. It's 0.3%. Am I saying that correctly? 0.3%.
I have a hard time with that.
I know, it's like, so, our total sales tax, I know I'm putting everybody on is what, local?
2.
So of that, 0.3% goes specific, is
Not
collected.
3%,
No, I know.
0.3%. Yeah.
I'm saying that correctly, right?
Yes.
That's what I was- So we track it separately. When you get when we provide to you, you'll notice monthly, when we provide to you, the council, the sales tax report for Mike Kennington, you'll see that it'll have the general fund sales tax, and it'll have a variety of categories, right? From retail to utilities and on and on and on. Not so much longer rental, but we won't talk about that right now. But then underneath that, you'll see specifically, it'll have tracking the street sales tax. You'll see, we'll actually track how much, we pull that out and we identify how much revenues coming into that each year. And again, kind of like what's been helpful to the general fund over the last several years is that increase in activity in the sales tax. So the transportation fund has benefited from that also. And that's what allowed us to double the amount of street maintenance dollars, not necessarily the amount of street maintenance, but it's allowed us also to take on these projects on the landscaping. We weren't doing that years ago, right? And we said, okay, it looks like we've got capacity now. Let's be a lot more intentional and aggressive in that effort. And so we've been able to identify those opportunities. So and then I will give examples of where we use it for other things that are part of the street and the street safety. For example, downtown, and Chase skipped right over my request in the budget, is so for special events downtown, you notice oftentimes we have to close off streets, and we've used the bollards. So one of the things we're finding at the Yard, the one McDonald locations, we're having to block off the alleyways and a parking lot, but we're using well, don't tell them, I think they're ugly, they're metal signs that they have to use, but we're going to try to put more bollards in there. So we're trying to create ways to use street funds to create more of those safety measures in downtown with all the big special events we have, and try to make it look nicer and be more effective. So that's how we try to use these funds. I mean, first and foremost, it was sold to the voters as really strongly to support streets, but specifically street maintenance, and I think we've done a pretty good job. We can be pretty, really what holds us back is not as much the funding, it's just the throughput of getting contractors and materials and getting out there. We've actually bought some large pieces of equipment. I don't know if we've gotten it yet. That's on its way. To doing some of the street maintenance. So we're trying to do things that are in the street and in the right of way. RJ's recently purchased or has coming a small concrete mixer, so we can be more effective in going out and doing sidewalk repairs?
Yes, so the issue we have there, Mr. Brady, Mayor Council, is we have a sidewalk contractor that will continue to do the bulk of our sidewalk or concrete work, but they have a lead time. So, if there's a hump in a sidewalk on an arterial street, we're looking at 30 days right now to get a contractor out. So the intent is to have our team do the smaller jobs, but that are high priority, so that we can get out there right away, because the sidewalk's only as good as long as it's connected and functional. So that is something that we're standing up.
Sidewalks are really nice. You do
All
a
right.
great job on the sidewalk.
Thank you.
She was just telling me you're doing a great job. Thank you.
So moving on to this slide.
I do
I'm
have
sorry,
one.
please.
I just want to challenge you a little bit on this engineer versus planner.
Okay.
A planner is really going to look at transportation holistically, don't you think? They're going to take in more of the community needs, community values. An engineer is really, aren't they just looking at, how the street slopes and the width and those very technical parts of
Eric can
of
go into more detail,
transportation?
council member, but traffic engineers as opposed to a civil engineer. So Beth Ewing's team has civil engineers, and they do the design work. Our folks are looking at system issues. Yes, they're looking at level of service, and efficiency and that sort of thing, but it is more than that. And as Eric says, we've brought a number of his staff on that have consulting backgrounds, that have done true transportation planning. I'd love for you to come over and meet our traffic studies team and talk about what they do. I'm not saying we can't do more, and that's why we're looking at
I
joining.
mean,
in.
because
But
the
the civil side of
transportation
this-
directly affects your community,
Right,
right?
but you're talking
It
about-
shapes it.
you're talking
Those are
about-
the types of things a
Right, but
planner
you're talking
looks
about
at.
the built environment, right? They're looking at the system and how it flows.
Exactly.
The built environment is in engineering. The planning side of
Yes.
it is in planning, and they do work together. But the built environment, who's going to actually design and, the actual physical part of the street improvements, that'll happen in engineering.
That's exactly right. And I feel like we have maybe this gap because the planner is looking at the parcel and the built form on the parcel in particular. The engineer's looking at the street in particular, and it doesn't sound like there's somebody looking at that cross-section. But
maybe we can
I
have
think
a-
they spend a lot of time having those conversations. You may feel that way, but I think the staff spends a whole lot of time in the same room having these conversations.
Maybe we can have a transportation planner in planning department. And then they can be,
Again,
With
I'm
the
trying
review-
not to create.
review,
I've got to
yeah.
keep coordinate, I've got to keep expertise and processes working together. I guess what the question
sure.
really is, tell us what it is you want. We will give you what, we'll look at what you want, but we have to work on the process, right, to make it work. And it's always a little bit of a tension and pull, but I have experts in traffic, transportation systems, but then I have very strong engineers who build things, and so they have to work together. Then we have land use, and that's in planning, and they all come together. They spend a lot of time having those conversations. So I think if the concern is about where is the transportation considering land use, that's probably more on the planning side, in making sure that voice is articulating the concerns to make sure transportation is meeting the needs of land use. That's how I would see it. Because I think one person in a department of this size is going to have some impact, but again, I think the expertise on land use and the connection with transportation is you would see that most likely in the planning department.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're,
Yeah, I think that was the question I wanted to make clear, is that we don't lack for land planning.
No.
And so it's okay to have that function not maybe embedded in the transportation department as long as it's embedded somewhere.
Yep.
but we don't have a transportation planner. Just leave it at that. I think there's
I don't-
cross,
I don't
but-
agree with that. I think
Really?
we're spending millions.
What I would say is we might not call it a transportation, actually, we do have a title transportation planner, but it's focused a little bit more on our bike and pedestrian programs. But our staff work very closely with development services, and I'd love to hear more of your ideas of what you're looking for. One of Eric's team literally is embedded in Nana's Monday, I think it's Monday's meetings. We're there
Is that Robert?
every, it's his team, but we have a gentleman, Peter
Robert
Vargas.
Odock is the quarterback of all the groups that come in. He's the one that manages them all, and And so that's where that happens.
But
there
we're
is
with
a-
them every week, you know, as development is coming through the process to talk about status, and we're, lots of meetings, and I'd love to sit down with you and talk more. All right, moving on. Chase talked about this, but we do have several decision packages, and I'm going to have Eric just talk a little bit more detail about temporary traffic control.
Sure. So we're asking for for 4 full-time employees in our temporary traffic control group. We've seen a significant rise in temporary traffic control permit applications and reviews over the past 2 years. We've actually doubled since fiscal year 21-22. And a lot of that's because development hasn't dropped off, but we've seen a lot of utility projects come in, and with the fiber installation that's going on citywide now, that has really ramped up. So while we're asking for 4 full-time employees, these are really a conversion. We've had to bring 3 temporary employees on just to keep up with the demand and try to keep up with things. As part of this, we do bring in revenue as part of a temporary traffic control permit, review fee. The increase in permits has obviously increased our revenue, and that revenue can cover these 4 positions.
So again, with all the fiber activity going on in the city, that's a big driver of this.
It is.
Question, Eric. On the fiber items, I know we've been getting the hang of it for the last 2 years. I know there was just a comment made by some of the companies on in the neighborhoods, like the excessive use of cones and just markers. I think maybe is a little bit too much. I get it in the main arterials, but it does, I think residents have complained on just how many and what they see as how many, and they perceive as like these are large projects and take forever. Like where am I gonna park, right? Because all these have no parking. So just a concern there of how we maybe work with the contractors and vendors on setting up inside neighborhoods, maybe less, but still be, thinking of safety, right? Of course. That's one comment. And then just on the time and calendar of issuing permits in some of these streets, especially the larger arterials. I've mentioned this, along Alma School for the last 4 or 5 years. This has just been a constant work. And I know we recently increased our fees and timelines for contractors, because it's contractors and us working on that. But sometimes these take a lot longer, and how we calendarize those improvements throughout these sections that seem to be like overly done multiple times, and it's just quality of life as far as how you travel. I travel on Alma School like every day of my life, and so I specifically I know Alma School personally well, and some of the improvements there, but I know it's hard and the development and the work that needs to happen, but just maybe looking at how do we calendar or setting up these
Councilor
main.
Reddy, that's a conversation we need to have with engineering.
Yeah.
Then permits those work to be done
Perfect.
there.
Okay.
So we can do that.
But I'm sure you all work with
They
engineering
have to
and setting
provide
up
the traffic control.
the traffic control.
But permitting the project would most likely come
Sure.
from engineer.
But we do have a lot of conversation with our engineering department, because as Mr. Brady says, they're permitting the work in the right of way and
Yeah.
inspecting it. And, it's not perfect. I won't
Yeah.
suggest that it is, but we do try to coordinate as best we can. There's a lot going on in the city right now. There's a lot of barricades. And that's why we're asking for additional staff.
And Mayor, I just would like to echo what Councilmember Heredia just said, because RJ, there's been a lot of projects going on in the district. It's a continuous frustration when they seem relatively abandoned, particularly when you put up the barricades, nothing happens for a long period of time. One of the reasons that we readjusted the fees that you're talking about for these new positions for the barricades was to eliminate the disincentive or for crews to leave Mesa projects to go to other communities because it was more expensive there, cheaper here. So when we have, I think when we have engineering come in, a discussion about moving these projects, and I get the complexity with, because a lot of these projects are not CIP projects.
They're not the city projects.
They're not the city
They're some of the
projects,
project, yeah.
and these, the city ones are easy. I call RJ goes, or Beth, and they go, we can check on this, but when they are private third party, and this is where a lot of the frustration happens, because all of a sudden barricades pop up, and like, where did this come from?
No, that's right.
Mayor, Councilmember, Eric knows that when I'm out driving, he knows when I'm out driving, because I usually come back with a question about barricades somewhere. Because it is frustrating. If you're a motorist and you're driving down the street and there's a setup and you don't see workers, it's like, what's going on? Now, there are times where you're gonna have barricades because there's a trench or concrete's been poured. I mean, so there are times when there's not visible work going on where you still have to have barricades, but there are other times where contractors were just paying the fee. And so we really loaded the increase on the arterial streets in particular, because that's what we were hearing, you know, in your district in particular, a lot of the concerns, so.
Yeah, it's a valid point. We need to keep watching it, because the private sector sometimes, like you said, it seems like they abandon the project, so.
Agreed, and that's what I like. First of all, in just your budget oversight, I like where you're focusing the new monies. We have acquired a lot of extra responsibilities from the state, particularly around the freeways. The good news is, you know, the bad news is that transfers that burden to us. The good news is I think we're gonna do a better job of maintaining that, because you're aware that we've had some litter issues and weed issues along the freeways when there was a hiccup in their contract, and their east side contractor went away, and so it got backlogged. So having that's important. The traffic barricade folks, anything they can do to help to coordinate with engineering that, hey, these barricades have been out for quite some time, and this project was supposed to be done, you know, in a month, and then the sign that's on the road just keeps moving down the road. Oh, it's going to be done in December, then January, February, and then they contact me, and clearly Councilmember Heredia is hearing the same things with some of the redevelopment that's going on. So moving these projects along, I love my roads. I like to drive on them. It's just, having a trench down the middle of one is not a safe thing.
And I know which road you're talking about, and I'm still trying to get an answer on that one for you, Councilmember.
I know somebody else that's doing it all the time too.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Well, not to belabor it, but it'd be nice the contractors would come back and do a drive-by, because I have barricades and cones and everything around properties that I lease, and it's inconvenient for those on the sidewalks. And
It is,
And so what we need is a barricade hotline. Is it RJ's number or what?
Sometimes it is, but we do have our main number you can call.
We do have a number, and we can provide that. I think we've been so burdened with the number of permits to review that really the extra staff that we're asking for is so that we can be out in the field more and to be able to make sure that the contractors are following what the permit is saying.
And they're picking up their
and picking
barricades
up-
at
Well,
the end.
the fact is, they're not picking up their barricades, they're leaving them there.
All right, well, with this additional staff, hope we can get on top of
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
So, you know, I don't want to inconvenience you because of my problem or constituents.
you're not inconveniencing us at
But
all.
as part of the process, we need to get this cleaned up, because it's not fair for those traveling on the sidewalks with their wheelchairs and scooters, and
Yep.
We hear your frustration, and we agree.
I'll just load them up and bring them over to your yard, then you can hold them hostage.
So that is our presentation. I'd be happy to answer any more questions if you have any, but thank you for the input and the feedback.
Thank you. You obviously got a lot of questions during the presentation. So, Council, anything else on this topic? We're good? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're at 9, so let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 9:10. We've 2 out of 4 presentations down, so we'll still got plenty of good stuff to do. Thank you. If you could please take your seats, I think we're ready to get back on the agenda. Thank you. Next item, item 1C on our agenda is a presentation and discussion on the Department of Innovation and Technology's budget.
Mayor,
Scott?
before we start, yeah, I
We'd
just
like
want
to
to make,
meet
I don't know
Scott.
if everybody's had a chance
Yeah.
to meet Scott Kahn, who's started, how long have you been now?
January 16th, I'm starting my 4th month.
All right.
Wow.
Scott, give us a little, just share briefly a little your background with the city council.
I started out in the private sector, climbed the corporate ladder at AT&T, wound up leaving them for the world of company turnarounds, did 7 of those successfully, lived at Lake Tahoe for 25 years, took my last company public and said goodbye. That lasted 6 months, and then I went into consulting. Let's call it executive overpriced consulting. Did that successfully for many years, sold it to a San Francisco firm, and said goodbye. And then an old client of mine, the city of Concord, California, brought me in and said, hey, we're having trouble with our technology, can you fix this? And long story short, I did. I left Concord for the city of Modesto in the Central Valley of California. Did a lot of great things for them, and then the job in Mesa came up, and the recruiter knew that I loved Mesa and that I visited here frequently every year to enjoy a lifelong friend of mine and play golf and do business. And he told me there were 280 applications, and I said, there's no way they're going to pick me. He goes, just throw the resume in. And lo and behold, you were silly enough to hire me on. So here I am.
Well, thanks for everything except that last part, but that's anyway.
So we got a lot of stuff that's broken. Can you fix this?
Yes, we can. Officially, good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. My name is Scott Kahn. I am your new Chief Information Officer in charge of the Department of Innovation and Technology. Sitting to my right is Melanie Humphreys. Melanie is our budget coordinator extraordinaire and head of administration in our department. She has graciously decided that she was going to sit next to me, provide moral support, and gently nudge me in the ribs.
This is a first for, Melanie is not used to this. So treat her kindly, but.
Her job is to nudge me in the ribs if I start going afoul of the budget discussion. So with that, really, there is no direct public-facing part of IT, but we have a very important purpose, and that is to build the technological foundation that supports all of the other internal departments here at the city who do, in fact, deal with the public on a day-to-day basis, and make sure they can do it in a technologically sound, safe, secure, and efficient way. So we were asked to put 3 priorities before you. We had trouble doing that because we have 2 major buckets that we play in IT. The first one is a high visibility bucket, things that everybody does get to see. And then the majority of our stuff is done in the behind the curtain bucket. So for instance, if your email's not working, we're working behind the curtain to fix that for you. Okay, but the 3 in the high visibility category fall into cybersecurity hardening. We need to make our city as difficult to hack or breach or attack as we possibly can. Can we make it 100% secure? Unfortunately, the answer is no, but we can be a harder target for those that are trying to attack us. And because the world of cybersecurity and ransomware and other types of attack have become a legitimate business for these people, if it takes them more time to try and attack us than it does somebody else, they will forget us and move on to the easier target. So our job is to make ourselves hardened. We also want to expand our network foundation. This typically shows itself in the fiber expansion that we're doing. Okay, that will drive everything that we do as a smart city going forward and enable future technologies to be leveraged quicker here if we have that infrastructure in place than anywhere else. We also are very big on what we call do-it employee engagement. We want to be the department, we want to be the city that every other city wants to emulate. Okay, when a job opening comes available here, we want people to know that the do-it department is the place they want to apply to first, as opposed to any other agency neighbors. Behind the curtain, the three priorities would be integrated planning. We have a wonderful project management office, and they are working to standardize processes, work better with our internal customer departments, and make sure we have a more formalized methodology so that we can produce repeatable results with every project that we undertake. We have a program called Application Rationalization, where we know out in the city here, we have multiple applications that all do the same thing. So the question we all asked ourselves was why? So instead of having 6 applications that do the same thing, we should have 1 or 2. Makes it less expensive to operate, makes it a lot easier to support. So we have that as one of our behind the curtain programs. We're also moving toward predictive metrics. Currently, we utilize a lot of what I call rear view metrics. You look at where you've been, hey, how did we do last month? We're trying to switch that over to predictive metrics, get information that helps us manage the business going forward. If we anticipate these 3 things are going to happen in the future, how are we going to deal with them and get that strategy in place now? On the network expansion, I am very pleased to share with all of you last week, the City of Mesa was awarded the coveted Smart 20 Award. This is an award that is given out to 20 cities across the world on an annual basis for transformative smart projects and innovations that drive the future. We won for our Connected Mesa public Wi-Fi. So we joined Taiwan, China, Canada, and 14 other US cities as an award winner this year. And we are the only city in Arizona and the only city in the Southwest, including all of California, that we're so honored with this award. This is all part of our network expansion plan. It enables things like that. So, from a metrics perspective, 3 metrics to share with you here. First is network availability. Our goal is 5 nines. That means 99.999% of network available uptime. So our systems are constantly running. Now you'll notice on the chart here that we have a little dip. Back in early 2023, the infrastructure team was adamant that I share with council that was not because the network was unavailable, it was because our network monitoring tool had a problem and went down during that moment in time. So they believe we were at 5 nines the entire time over the last 4 years. The next metric is a behind the curtain metric. This is all about integrated IT planning and the effectiveness of our program management office. Okay. Typically, in the IT world, most projects are 50% over budget and over time. Based on our metrics, we're running at 97.1% on time and on or under budget. This is frankly unheard of. And I'm working to discover, is that truly accurate based upon what we're tracking? The answer is yes. So we're doing a heck of a job in the integrated planning aspect. Final metric, application rationalization and application availability. Okay, while we are working to reduce the number of applications, that's going to be a longer term process, and we will do it over time. I'll give you a for instance. We have automatic vehicle location applications. These are the things that show us where the various fleet, police, fire, any other vehicles the city employs are located on a map. Right now we have 6 AVL applications running out there. So we're working with fleet in cooperation with them to have an RFP where we're going to move it down to 1 or 2, okay, and start saving money in that realm. That's just one example. But the application uptime needs to mirror the network uptime. We should be at 5 nines. We're real close here, 99.61%. So some work to be done there. Our budget for proposed 24-25, currently $47.8 million. Now you'll notice there are some pretty good discrepancies in the different year to years here. This is really because we're comparing apples to oranges. You've got the budget versus the revised budget versus the year-end estimated budget versus the proposed new budget. And in IT's case, many of our projects are multi-year projects. So the money follows the project through to the next year. Our 24-25 proposed budget currently does not include monies that might follow, things that we had not yet completed. So that number is subject to change. You'll also notice we have a second slide on budget. This is our communications team. The communications team joined DoIT multiple years ago, and the budget office keeps them as a separate fund, so we like to present it as a separate fund for clarity purposes. And we're looking at 4.7 in the communications area. This is radio support for fire, police, and maintenance, anybody using the radio in the outside world. We support that infrastructure. This is also fiber, putting fiber in the ground, maintaining the fiber, connecting the fiber. So adjustments that we're asking for going forward here really revolve, in this case, around fiber. Because we are putting so much in the ground, and because we are now having to maintain that in the ground, and because we are expanding the number that we're putting in the ground, we need another engineer to crawl down the manholes and make sure that everything's connected up and operational and works correctly. Along with that, we need a truck with all the safety features, the crane that can pull a manhole cover off the street, the cones that we set up that we will clean up and make sure you aren't parking in my driveway, Councilmember. And we will also take care of all the safety lights that have to go up around there. When you're working in the street, everybody understands it's kind of dangerous. Speaking of fiber, this map you see before you represents what I would consider best practice fiber architecture. It is a loop. You put a loop around the city of fiber so that if any contractor mistakenly digs in the street and tears up one of your fiber lines, everybody that's on that loop is still able to get internet, still able to communicate back and forth, because you have two different paths you can go to get that. So it's a redundant best practice design, and this is what the city of Mesa is embracing and continuing to expand. In fact, just some statistics for you, we currently have 300 linear miles of fiber. So if you were to take one fiber strand, just picture one piece of glass strand and put it end to end, we have 300 miles of that currently in play in the city. Total fiber strand miles is 20,000. So you put a cable in the ground, it has multiple strands, you're only going to use one for your communication purposes. We have all the other strands available for future expansion. So we are already building the future into our fiber model here.
Excuse me, question.
What are the different colors representing on this map?
The brown colors are fiber we are currently going or are in progress of putting in using the latest bond. The green are fiber that we already have. The other colors are fiber we already have in place.
Scott, you're going to mention that that the loop is not the shape of Mesa.
Yeah, this loop is not the shape of Mesa. And there's a slide coming up on, looks like some different data storage options, and it's not connected to the loop that's not the shape of Mesa.
We are running, yeah, that is very good. We are running a fiber connection, what we call dark fiber strand, to the item that's coming up on a future slide here. Yes.
Touch on that.
Okay.
I guess to your point, you want to have a loop so that if there's a break, that you have continuity of operations.
Correct.
But if you're going to build a strand down there, you're going to include that in the loop. So as you present, maybe.
That will take time, but our plan is to do it as a loop.
Okay.
Okay, and when we get to that building, I'll explain the mechanics behind it and the difference.
I'm sorry, I have one quick question as well. Now, the fiber network that you're describing is for city government purposes, public safety.
City-owned.
City-owned, city communications, not to be confused with the micro trenching and the AT&T, Google Fiber, all of that.
Correct.
But is there any connection. For example, I know a lot of those guys, they need to have nodes, right? And so, and we have dark fiber, I assume. So to what extent is there collaboration between our fiber and the commercial fiber?
There's an opportunity to collaborate with third-party vendors for revenue gain, if we so choose to do that.
And it's happened, Mayor. We have always made it known to the fiber companies that come in. They all have this. And so there have been some instances, I can think specifically out in the southeast, where we have actually sold, well, and even on the west side, where we've actually, I don't know, the word is rented out space. I don't know what the right word is, but we have arrangements where we're providing space within our conduit, and they prepay the entire amount over, whatever, 20 years or whatever it is. So we've done that on occasion. We've made that available.
Mr. Reddy?
Yeah, I think along Southern, there's some of that.
Exactly.
where-
Yep.
When we
that's one
improved Southern.
on the west side, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've done it on the east side too. I can't remember who, I don't know, was it for Apple or who, anyway, we've done it on the west, or the east, both east and west, yeah.
The other comment, I thought along the light rail, we did fiber all through the line.
It is there.
Okay.
If I were to show you the fiber map with all of the offshoots that come off the loops, it would be.
This isn't everything.
Oh, it's
This
not
is to
everything.
show you we have a
Yeah,
loop.
yeah, okay.
But there is just strands going, because we go out to fire stations, we go
Yeah.
out to different city facilities off the loop. So the loop is kind of the highway or whatever, it's the.
Correct.
It's our. Freeway. It's our 101 loop, I guess, or whatever.
I just wanted to just show the intelligence of the design and the architecture that was going into this, so yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So with our ask for the fiber engineer and for a truck, you're looking at the slide here. Basically, the 154 is the truck. The fiber engineer would be 136 going forward. And this is the slide I think you wanted to get to, council member. So we are in the process of preparing to build a new primary data center, right? In this case, let's call it a business continuity data center. We have scouted various locations, and this one fits the bill from a price perspective, from an available space perspective, and from an access to different fiber vendors, including ourselves. The big bonus here is this actually saves us a lot of money. Our other primary data center, it used to be an AT&T center. It's now a third party called Evoke. That contract is coming due end of 2025. And they cost us a lot of money annually. Matter of fact, roughly $400,000 annually to put our data in there. And we're not exactly satisfied with the facility and how they've been keeping it up. And right now they're telling us they're out of space. They're out of power. They're out of air conditioning. So it now limits us from being able to put additional things into that center. So we started looking for a replacement. And this is what we found, is the Comarch building. And the idea here is to build it with different ingress and egress points for fiber. So a lot of data centers make a big mistake. They bring everything in through one side of the building. We wanted to make sure we had it through two sides of the building. So we could put it on a loop, either one that we develop ourselves or that we develop one part of the loop and we purchase fiber from one of the other vendors for the other part of the loop, right? Again, all in the name of redundancy. So if it gets cut, we always have the other side. We can still get internet and communications through. Okay, so this facility will give us that opportunity to do so. And it's going to wind up saving us $300,000 annually.
So that's after we recover. That'll happen, what, year 3?
Year 3.
Or year 3. So we have to build out the fiber and bring all that in. But once we've done that, the significant difference between what we have to pay for this storage versus what it is today is, it allows us to recover all that cost or realize that savings in the third year.
Correct. We will hit break even in year 3.
So are we using this particular building? for expanding this building, or is it just going in the building?
The initial use of the building, as we're building it out, will become a business continuity site. So we'll have servers sitting at Evoke that run the main production business, and then we'll put duplicate servers into this facility.
In this
So
facility.
that if something ever happened with the Evoke facility, we could switch over and still maintain critical application operations.
And they're completely off two separate grids,
Correct.
two separate
Two separate power.
energy sources. So it really does give us tremendous redundancy physically, energy-wise. So it does give us another level of security for our system.
I do like that part, and it's using an existing facility, so, and saving us money is always a good thing. I like the efficiencies there. With the loop rain, I just, and maybe this is planned or there's something in there, but I think if we have some city infrastructure in my district, including Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport is down in that area. So how are we tying?
Well, we can let them know about it, let them share that we'll have that there, as you're trying to say, that they may need that fiber at some point.
I think they might need that fiber
Yeah.
shut.
We can always share what we have in place and.
Yeah,
Okay.
most
make
fiber
them-
cables will have 128 strands in them. And then we can just put multiple cables in. I mean, it gets big real fast. And like I say, we only need one strand, so.
Yeah,
We can do that, yeah. we can try to
not just
share
the
that with
airport,
them, yeah.
ASU Poly, and then there's businesses down there, so I mean.
Once we put that conduit in, we're certainly, and we actually, council's even adopted a fee specifically for when someone wants to put fiber in our conduit. So we'll be glad to share that, yeah.
Perfect, all right, thank you.
I'm sorry, I need to back up a little bit. So we contract out, in the past it's been to Evoke, and we're talking now about switching to Comark, or is this going to be a city-owned and operated facility?
The facility, the building itself won't be city-owned, but the fiber we run into there and all the equipment we place in, the racks and all the different pieces of computers and servers and storage, all of that will be us. So we'll be leasing space from them.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not buying the building.
Yeah.
And the people walking around with the clipboards are not going to have, they're not City of Mesa FTEs?
Probably iPads or laptops, but.
But the three cars in the parking lot out in front of this data center, are they Mesa City employees or are they Comark employees?
No, just as we do with all of our data centers, once they're set up and operational, we remotely monitor them. It really doesn't require somebody to be on site the entire time. If we anticipate an issue or if we're seeing a glitch, we send people to the location and they manage it.
So we don't have staff
Yeah.
at AT&T today or Evoke or whatever.
And the servers are our servers, and we're
Yes.
just renting a building to put them in?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, they literally are in a cage.
yeah.
Yeah.
And just think about well, Mayor, we've gone through these big data centers. What they provide is the facility, the large enough facility, the cooling. It's really the infrastructure that allows us to put those racks in there. And the power and the cooling is kind of what I always think about.
Power and cooling is everything.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
With that, happy to take any other questions about the Department of Innovation and Technology.
Ms. Duff?
Of course. Looking into the 21st century, is there any bandwidth or any efforts into some of the newer technologies, integrating AI into our systems, digital twins to prototype pilot situations?
Absolutely. And the City of Mesa intends to be a leader in this. Matter of fact, we're working with the City Manager's Office, Ian Linson, and multiple others, Evan Allred in the data analytics area, to come up with an initial AI introduction and implementation plan. We know different staff throughout the city are already dabbling and playing with different applications that are, artificial intelligence based. I mean, most of you have heard of ChatGPT. It's pretty interesting and fun to play with. It does a lot of very neat things that we think could be very valuable and productive to how we do business here in the city. But we are forming a group that will actually be the early adopter AI group And they will be, we'll get one from each department, and we're preparing, as we speak, a poll to go out in Inside Mesa to find out how city staff is using AI today. What application are you using? What are you using it for? What do you think of its results, et cetera? So once we gather how we're currently using it, we'll have some use cases that we can train everybody else in the city on, and be able to pick and choose the ones that are actually adding exponential value to productivity, to efficiency, to how we do this. In fact, we are using AI today. If you dial in and get one of our phone trees, that voice that says press 1 for this, press 2 for that, is AI generated. We had trouble finding a radio voice to do the recordings for that, or a multilingual voice to speak Spanish. You'll press 1 for Spanish. That is now artificially intelligently created and recorded.
So I've recently authorized a management policy on the use of AI for the city. We've had presentations on the use, and Ian and Scott are working, again, just as he said, pulling in the departments to get them kind of comfortable with it and explore opportunities, even giving them access to software, specific types of software that are related to AI, so they can begin utilizing those throughout the city in different applications.
So those are all kind of public-facing or interaction with the public, and I assume
Not
looking
necessarily, they could
also
be internal
in
uses.
efficiencies
Yeah.
across,
Yep.
looking at maybe
Efficiencies.
ordinances and, things like that.
How we
There could
process
be-
permits, how
Yeah,
we
yeah. Okay.
respond in correspondence, all kinds of things.
Wonderful. And digital twins, is that something we're approaching?
Probably the best way to put it is the city of Mesa intends to be the driver in Arizona for this. Okay, we want to form the AI governance group and ask other cities to join with us to make sure we're using this responsibly, ethically, morally, intelligently, right? Because some AI results can give you false information. So, and it's in the policy.
The policy, you can use AI, but you own it.
Yeah.
Whatever you put out, you own it. So you better read it, you better check it, make sure, because just because you can't say, well, I just did AI, I didn't know. That's, it's not an excuse. But it's certainly from a productivity standpoint and a lot of opportunities of gathering information. Yeah, we're definitely getting deeper into it.
And there's a couple of valley cities that are doing a digital twin right now, and I think we could, they're smaller cities, learn from them and their, experiences, and so we can.
Absolutely. And
dip our
this is
toes
so
into
new
that.
this is so new for everyone that, we don't want to make mistakes that others might have made. We'd rather learn from those. So yeah, we'll be reaching out to our fellow municipalities and saying, hey, how are you doing this?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Curious on the project around, we invested in setting up more towers for our Wi-Fi, I think, system, and providing equipment to people to tap into that maybe do not have access, fully connected access to internet, and providing some equipment there. How's that program going, or is there any status update there as far as where we're at in that investment?
I can get you a report on
Sure.
status, don't have that prepared for today. Okay, but we are identifying the routes where we'll be laying the fiber, and have already worked with another company on installing, again, Connected Mesa.
Sure.
Okay, that for the Smart 20 Award. Okay, we'll be putting out an RFP shortly to expand the implementation of that, and move it out to those areas that are having trouble getting internet access.
Okay.
That is the plan. The RFP is at the very beginning stages, so I can get you some timing and status on that as we go.
But initially, a lot of that work was done with the ARPA dollars.
The ARPA dollars, yeah.
Great. Other questions, council?
Yes, welcome.
It's a
Scott,
pleasure.
thank you.
I'm ecstatic to be here.
You bet.
He's
Well
one
done.
of your constituents.
Thank you.
All right. Yes. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 1D, moving through the agenda, is a presentation and discussion on the city's redevelopment areas and strategies for implementing RDA plans. It's an impressive group. Good to have you here.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Jeff McVeigh, Manager of Downtown Transformation, and you just said it. Today I have the Dream Team with me to help present with Nana Apia, Jay O'Donnell, and Jeff Robbins to help us present an overview of the city's redevelopment areas, current implementation efforts, and strategies for future implementation. We're going to get started, and Mr. Robbins is going to start by giving us an overview of the RDAs.
Mayor, Council, good to be with you today. The Mesa City Council has adopted 4 redevelopment areas that are currently active in the city. The first was the Town Center RDA, which was established in 1999, renewed in 2015, and then the Office of Economic Development led the creation of 3 additional redevelopment areas, the Southwest in 2017, and then the West and the East RDAs, both which were adopted by Council in 2018. This shows the map currently of our redevelopment areas, and you can see that the bulk of our working area is south of University down to the US 60, and then from our western border with Tempe east to Gilbert Road. We have a number of very important sites within these redevelopment areas. In downtown, we have cul-de-sac at Transform 17. To the west, the Asian District is in our west RDA, Fiesta Malls in the southwest, and then the terminus for our light rail is at Main in our east redevelopment area. So we show these to you also with a caveat that while these are a very important focus for our working group at the dais here today, they are not the only places where infill and redevelopment work. So as we continue to work on redevelopment areas, the tools, the tactics that work here, they work other places too, and we can take those outside of those areas and deploy them so that they're effective.
I'm sorry, Ms. Pillsbury.
So on that, which I love hearing, because obviously a lot of our districts aren't this area. But so we don't need to actually specify a new RDA or redevelopment area for like all the way down Main Street or Superstition Springs, or like, we don't need to actually do that. We can just use the same.
Well, I would correct Jeff just a little bit. The RDAs do provide, under state law, provide some unique opportunities.
Okay.
As you can tell, as we kept trying to go further east and even south, it became more and more difficult to create or find eligible, under the definition of blight. Remember, what drove these RDAs was a finding of blight in these areas predominantly. And that's really the report we have from consultants documents the blight in these areas. And I don't necessarily believe that an area has to be blighted to need redevelopment, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to give some examples of that and talk about areas we've worked in. What we're just trying to make a point is we do have RDAs. There are opportunities in these RDAs because of the documentation from the consultants about, I mean, they've studied literally every parcel inside of these RDAs and provided kind of a,
Or specific plan.
Opportunity, ideas about what where we can work on and needs to be addressed. But certainly infill and other opportunities outside the city might exist. In these areas, we might be able to provide some unique incentives that are unique to this area, but then there's other incentives we may be able to create citywide, especially in the code areas, right? We can create codes that change about setbacks and zoning for smaller lots and things like that.
Because as I have brought up to all of you at different times, just my concern is Main Street from Lindsay East to Sossaman, which is my whole district. So I just, I mean, did they look at that? Is there a benefit to making that be like an RDA, or?
I guess we
can just
explore
work on
it.
it.
It is such a long process, these RDAs and the findings. Like, Jeff, you want to?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Pillsbury, I think Jim's going to jump in here. So maybe this is where you were going, Jim. In 2018, January 1st, we had to use some of our tools, specifically a G-Plat lease, which we're going to talk about in a minute. We have to have a central business district and a redevelopment over the same area.
Right.
And in 2018, we used to have a total area to work with of up to 5%, and that was reduced to 2.5% in 2018.
By the legislature.
By the state legislature, not by the city council.
Okay.
And so that limits some of the area we can work with. Jim, anything else you wanted to run there?
Yeah, and I think they also put some other sort of contiguity requirements as far as the Central Business District in order to get the 8-year abatement on GPLET, government property lease excise tax. And so it's become much more difficult. These areas are grandfathered in. And so to place another one in, it's not just a redevelopment area, it also has to comply with the Central Business District to be able to get that 8-year abatement on the GPLET. That was why many cities used to do these hand in hand, redevelopment area and a Central Business District. But like Jeff said, the legislature cut it back significantly about 6 years ago.
So, I mean, even our city is 140 square miles or whatever, so obviously, looking down the road, there's gonna be a lot more opportunities for things to get blighted and old and need to have redevelopment. So, I mean, this just won't be the tool we use for that?
Yeah, there's other tools. There's also, unfortunately, they've also cut back the benefit of the GPLET deal too. So it's also has its own issue. And you can only have one central business district too. And so, so it has to be, there's been a number of limitations. And so, but there's other ways we can find for doing infill that it doesn't have to just be an RDA, but, or in a central business district. But the one tool that this area is benefited is to the extent that we want to use the 8-year abatement, it's limited to these areas that you see on this map.
Okay, and so, yeah, specifically, we wouldn't be looking to extend RDAs.
There's specific limitations on the tools we could use.
Okay.
And we also need to demonstrate we're actually being active in these areas too.
Okay.
But again, we want to emphasize, we're going to look for opportunities across the whole city, right? And so, but we needed to show this because it does provide a significant documentation and opportunity, but it wouldn't limit where we would, we might have to address it differently, approach it differently, an infill or project outside of these areas.
I believe we also have an opportunity zone map, and that was supposed to drive some development in parts of our city. I don't remember that map as far as where it lays over, and, of course, I know my district, but I know that was another opportunity to encourage investment. I maybe look at that. I don't know if I went over maps in your area.
Yeah, and that's private investment too, right?
Private
Yeah.
investment, not city.
All right, so we've talked about this a little bit, but I'll catch us up. What is a redevelopment area? It's simply a geographic area that council has designated to be in need of revitalization. And Mr. Brady talked a little bit about this, about how we get there. This is a construct of the state, and so they set the definitions of how do you even get to an RDA, and they define that as an area that has a predominance of blighted parcels. And we say predominant, we mean over 50%. And so Mr. Brady talked a little bit about how that was done, that there was an inventory and analysis where we went out and looked at all the parcels and determined that yes, in these different areas, over 50% had at least one blighting condition. Those are up on the screen now. Any parcel that has any one of these, it can have multiple, but if it has any one of these conditions, it's considered blighted by statute. So some of those are unsanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of the site, diversity of ownership, just to name a few. So why do we want them? This is the important piece, and it's basically, as an economic developer, we want more tools in our toolbox to be able to try to bring the private sector to focus that investment into these areas and to help them transform. We talked a little bit about GPLET already, or GPLET, depending on how you pronounce it. There is that 8-year tax abatement. That is specific. This is a very important point, and we've touched on this, is that it's only allowed where you have that central business district and the redevelopment area together, and that's within our current RDAs. So that is specific to this area. We also can perhaps leverage a wide range of federal and state grant opportunities, and each of these areas also comes with a plan, a redevelopment area plan that was created when council made the finding necessity, and that helps us as staff to focus our resources and efforts into moving forward. This is also an area where it defines a geographic location where it may make sense too for council to authorize other programs or incentives to help us to do the work of redevelopment and infill.
And can I just say quickly, Mayor, we were made aware of this week. The governor actually did veto a bill that would have reduced the GPLET abatement period from 8 to 4. So there's a lot of interest in trying to reduce this. So hopefully in the next year or so, we can find some opportunities to take advantage of this tool before it gets reduced significantly, so.
Yeah. Thank you to the governor for doing that. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what the motivation that some legislators have for reducing this. I think economic development is generally a good thing, and we ought to not discourage it. But maybe I'm not seeing something. I'm sorry. Please continue.
That was actually, Mayor, a great segue into the next slide. Whenever we do a GPLET lease, we have to have a third-party economist do an analysis, and that analysis has to show that the public sector is receiving a benefit greater than what is being offered. And so we do that for every GPLET lease, and what you're seeing on the screen now, these are some of our grand totals. We have 6 projects since 2017, 2017 being the date that our Southwest RDA was established. So we have 6 projects total within the boundaries of the RDA since 2017, and these are some of the high-level summary totals, but the total construction impact from these 6 projects is $190 million. CapEx was $155 million. We've had 1,020 housing units, specifically multifamily housing units that have been constructed in these projects, and then the total direct financial benefit to the city of Mesa is $4.5 million. Of that, $2.3 million comes from one-time construction sales tax. So, and then as we get into the really kind of the soft things, we're talking about transforming an area, right? It benefits the businesses around it, and in economic development, we say success begets success. So there's a lot that goes on top of these numbers, but these are some of our big impact numbers.
We just wanted to demonstrate, yes, we have been doing redevelopment. Sometimes it kind of gets blended into some of these projects, but there's been work done on redevelopment in the redevelopment areas.
And Mayor, Council, here's a great example. Stone's throw across Main Street from here. We have the old Brown & Brown Chevrolet. In 2011, that was an active business site. By 2015, the buildings were still there, but no business activity was going on. 2018, the buildings are gone. 2022, using a GPLET lease, we start seeing some of those buildings as being erected. And by the end of 2022, we have framing on all of those different buildings. So what does that mean to an impact to the city? Well, it means that before the construction of that site was appraised, or I'm gonna use the wrong word here, assessed. It was assessed value was just over $3 million. And I'm gonna use the specific word during construction because we don't even have the final assessed value at this point. But during construction, our latest numbers show that site's full cash value is now worth $37 million. And that results in an annual secondary property tax to the city every year of approximately $17,000. Another great site, this one gives me smiles, is the AZ Central. They did a piece every year looking at the worst eyesores in the East Valley, and one of the frequent flyers on that list was the northwest corner of Alma School and Southern. That used to be the Grace property. And Economic Development and Development Services did a great job of facilitating that project and changing that from what it was into, you can go to the next slide, perfect, into the landing at Fiesta Village. So again, before construction, that was valued at less than $3 million. Now it is, full cash value is over $72 million. For just new residents coming to the city, that results in approximately $18,000 in additional sales tax. And then in terms, let me cut off a little bit there, annual secondary property tax is over $28,000 a year.
And the real savings to the city is all the code compliance calls we had out there. It was huge. We're out there all the time, so. Public safety, code, yep, all those.
Transients, yeah.
Yeah.
So as you can see from the examples provided by Mr. Robbins, RDAs have been a focus of the city staff over the years, ever since they have been implemented. But the reality is that our departments have been kind of addressing RDAs in our own spheres of influence. Starting in 2023, this group began working together to start identifying our future programs, projects, and priorities for implementations of RDAs. I can tell you after 9 years, and I just realized that today, 9 years of working on downtown transformation, it takes a village to be able to do this job. Anywhere from energy resources is needed to help deliver electricity to new projects, whether it's working with solid waste to create a pilot commingled recycling program for our downtown multifamily projects, or whether it's working with development services and the historic preservation staff on our own city projects and getting the studios and the post up and on the ground. It takes all of us working together. So while each of us will continue to have specific projects and priorities that we're working on, the role of this team and the new working group that we are talking about including in this year's budget is really the major focus is the collaboration and coordination amongst all the city departments that are necessary. Going forward, this group will continue to meet, and we're going to start bringing in more and more people into the discussion. As you imagine, code compliance is going to have a big role. Housing and community development will have a big role. So to get us started, first we're going to have Jay and Nana kind of talk about what their work in the RDAs and what their roles will be going forward.
Thank you, Jeff. Mayor and Council, nice to be with you this morning. Good morning. I did want to just remind everyone of what we've been working on over the past few years. Some of this is specific to the RDAs, but we've obviously covered the city on some of these as well. But just to reiterate what Jeff was saying, I think it is good to mention what has been accomplished with a more siloed approach because it has been significant. So I'm really looking forward to a more coordinated and integrated effort moving forward. The Asian District branding was one of the strategies or recommendations in the West RDA plan, and it was considered to be low-hanging fruit. It was really the infrastructure was already there. We just needed to elevate it from a marketing perspective. So we developed and launched a brand for the Asian District in 2020, and since then it has been wildly successful, and we've been promoting it through public relations efforts, collateral and social media distribution. We've also placed environmental signage throughout the district, and we've of course added murals, which has been a very successful public-private partnership as well. And we will continue to add murals with those property owners who wish to have them at their properties. Last fall, we won the International Economic Development Council Gold Award for the Asian District in the category of neighborhood development. So we are really proud of that award and could not have done that alone. The stakeholders have been key in participating in our efforts, as well as Jeff mentioned, other departments. Even arts and culture was pulled in specifically around the murals project. Also, neighborhood cleanups have occurred and obviously could be and should be expanded in the RDAs in particular. And then we've also utilized our Mesa Business Builder Small Business Assistance Program to really target businesses in the RDAs to make sure that we're working with those businesses directly and helping them with customized business assistance. So, for example, there are businesses in the Broadway corridor, which is in an RDA, who have had some signage challenges and they need some improved aesthetic and really some work on their properties. So through our business assistance program, we've been able to work with them and provide new and better improved signage to get them into compliance and then hopefully increase their visibility and their sales. And then finally, working with underperforming properties. This is something that can be applied citywide, not just in the RDAs, but for example, with Fiesta Mall, working with the developer there across citywide departments to help re-envision what can happen at the Fiesta Mall site is one of those projects that Mr. Brady had mentioned, including Superstition Springs. How do we want to reimagine and figure out how that property might evolve? So working with the developer and property owners on that particular property as well. So just a couple of examples. And I'll turn it over to Nana.
Mayor, Council, good morning. So at the end of the day...
I'm sorry, was there a question for Jay?
Jay, you kind of touched on it a little bit there because I wanted to ask about, it's one thing to deal with the businesses, which is important, but the businesses often rent from a property owner. And what we find oftentimes is that those the signage belongs to the property owners. How are we engaging them? How are they reinvesting in their properties? You often find that parking lot, trying to redevelop parking lots is a problem because there are contracts on those lots, or there is a non-competition clause. So if we see a grocery store go away, you can't bring in another one because the contract on that private property is you can't have a competition. So what do we how are we able to address those challenges?
That, Mayor, Councilmember Summers, that's a really good point, and that's something that we've tried to do. The pilot program that we're doing on the Broadway corridor specifically is to work with the property owners and the company that is leasing the space. So we think that once we get this kind of down, it will be easier to apply to other parts of the city. In terms of bigger property challenges, that's another area that we need, I think, some work on. And maybe, Nana, you can speak to your experience in that area.
Mayor, councils, I don't want to mention the specific area, but basically, yeah, there's been challenges, but for the past couple of months, what we've been doing is trying to talk to both the property owners and the potential developers and those that are already existing using the property to find out what the overall goal and long-term vision is and how we can help them really achieve the vision. Sometimes there are covenants on the property and we have to really dig down and try to find out if they are even willing, and getting hold of them itself is a problem. So that's the challenges that we continue to have. But Jay and I met with Mr. Brady a couple of months ago about
Yeah, the challenge sometimes is willing owners, right? Participatory owners, I think. And so as much as we try to reach out and contact and encourage that, frankly, we end up spending most of our time with property owners who are looking for opportunities to transform and look at different options for their properties because they age out. But we've had, I'm thinking of the old Kmart over off of Power and Hampton or whatever. We were able to work with that. There's no longer a Kmart there. There's a very large multifamily development, but fits very well because there's a Target and there's lots of shopping right there. So we try to, it's just sometimes it's the timing of finding the motivated owners to get that. I think sometimes if we can set up the process and the word gets out, maybe outside investors come in and see opportunities and they can buy out the owners that have been sitting there for a long time. And that's how we try to keep that momentum going. But we're really just trying to go around the city. We had this opportunity to sit down together and say, okay, where are the opportunities across the whole city where we can have some high impact opportunities? And so we keep, and we're, share those with us, but certainly we're actively having discussions with Fiesta. We've been doing that for years. And frankly, I think it's because of the mayor and Councilman Heredia really taking time to sit down with the property owner over the last, I don't know how many years, frankly, but, and just encouraging that owner to consider doing something significant and getting the support of the city. We're having those conversations out at Superstition Springs, and we've talked to the, is she the general manager? And just say, we know at some point, or it's already happening, but let's start on this conversation early before, and just recognize there's transitions that need to take place across the city.
Yeah, it's a difficult challenge because one of the previous examples in this presentation took more than a decade because the property owner had no interest. Right. So it sat there and became dilapidated and a major problem. The fact that Fiesta has been so open to it, that Superstition has reached out for what's next, because the market's changed. Those types of malls aren't working anymore, so how do we re-envision these things? But looking at the map of the areas that we're talking about specifically in these town center, for example, Southwest, there's some properties that have been sitting there for quite some time. There's some that have created some issues because they've been abandoned, and there are absentee property owners that are creating a blight in a city that they don't live in. So how we crack that nut to incentivize people to actually invest in their property for their own benefit and for ours is something I would like to try to benchmark.
And I guess that kind of goes along with what I was going to ask about. What I thought that this was going to be was more, this seems to be sort of a large scale, almost placemaking redevelopment initiative, I was thinking in my mind, it was going to be more of a sort of a bottom-up, how do we encourage small-scale, small business development around the city? And kind of to Councilmember Summers' point, what are some of the existing obstacles? Why we don't have some of that regeneration? Why things are not maybe redeveloping on their own on a small level around the city? I'm not saying, you know, it should be one or the other. I'm just kind of voicing, I was under the impression that's what we were going to be talking about. This is a large scale, really identifying whole placemaking areas is what it seems like to me. Are we going to do any of the other, I guess is my question. Are we going to really, and I guess that's more adaptive reuse, programming, infill on, we're going to look at policies and procedures that might spur that bottom-up redevelopment on a small scale.
Mayor, Councilmember Goldford, actually, you just went straight into my next point.
Okay.
So if you look at, one of the things that we're going to look at is infill development standards, and you asked the question about what has really been a challenge to redevelopment. Over time, we've come up with, you know, different strategies. Example, in our zoning ordinance, we do have infill development district. We have infill incentive district. What has been going on is because they are isolated in other places, and you know, either through our zoning ordinance or other areas. When we talk to the development community why we're not seeing much of the redevelopment, they always tell us that it's very challenging to really go to these areas to redevelop. And so what we are doing and planning is working on is really coming back to the council to present to you an infill ordinance where our goal is to make sure that all the various strategies are kind of grouped into an area that makes it very visible and easy to use. In addition, we are also looking at challenges that has hindered this redevelopment area, either for half an acre lot, or even some of those bigger lots. Some of the challenges are universal. So we're looking at all the incentives to really encourage redevelopment into this area. So your question, we are digging down into the basically the micro level as well.
As well as adaptive reuse, right? Not just vacant parcels, but maybe turning a house into a little restaurant, you know, and looking at our zoning and how that is prohibitive right now, and maybe things that we can do to change that?
Yes,
Okay.
we are looking at that. Our building official, actually, this is why John is here. John has been working with the other staff and planning staff over the year to include adaptive reuse, because most of these areas, they will have to turn existing buildings into other uses, and we want to make sure that we make it, at the end of the day, we really want to streamline the processes to serve as an incentive for redevelopment to happen in these areas as well. And back to Councilmember Spilsbury, so such policies will be used across the whole city, any place that we have infill or redevelopment area. That's why we're trying to establish this as a beta test to be used across board.
Do you feel like you have a good sense from those community members as to what those obstacles are? Or is there still some learning to be done? Are you going to go out and do some outreach?
We do have a sense over the years what has been challenging. First of all, we did have a lot of green space areas or greenfield. And so that was one of the things. But now that we are running out of greenfield, then it's becoming an incentive for us to look at those areas that actually need redevelopment.
But if you think about it, almost every property in downtown is a adaptive reuse.
Yeah.
Right? They weren't built for restaurants or residential or whatever. So we have been doing it.
Oh, I think
And we
there's
do it,
no
and we're doing
argument.
it for small individual owners. And sometimes it's complying with the building code. It could be fire safety issues. It could be putting in grease traps. And then sometimes it's that there's just not the utility infrastructure that wasn't intended for the use they have. And so then we have to come back and figure out what role the city plays in that.
I think you're exactly, we all have watched downtown. I think the point is, to go beyond that, right? I mean, there's no argument that we've
Right.
been doing it
I think
downtown.
the key is, again, just like the large properties, it doesn't change. There has to be a willing investor, developer who wants to sit down and try to make this happen.
For sure, and that goes to my question, why aren't they doing it? Is there something that's cost prohibitive,
I think,
code prohibitive?
well, I do think a part of it is
inspection?
the
What is it?
economics, right? I think it's the economics of taking on a small parcel versus looking for something where they can do mass.
Yeah. Well, those are two different developers,
Not,
don't you think?
Not always,
I mean,
not always. I mean, I'd love to, if there's smaller developers who are not being able to get things done, they need it, they could talk to Nana all the time.
yeah.
We do. So one other thing that we're looking at, as we've used it successfully, is the form-based code structure. One of the things it does is basically it helps to speed up those development because we've already created a structure. So when you come in, you meet the structure, and even with the RDAs, that was one of the recommendations for us to see other areas in the cities that we can actually use the form-based code. And since I've been here, Jeff and I keep looking at the form-based code. We have an idea what has really worked well, what needs adjustment. As I'm talking right now, I know Jeff is working with planning to make some minor tweaks to even our existing form-based code. So we're going to look at it to see which areas in the city that it can also be used. And then we are looking at our building code to see, as we pursue the adaptive reuse, what are the changes. And then at the end of the day, we want to make sure that, we're looking at how it can also help not only the commercial pieces, but how we can use adaptive reuse and redevelopment to really create opportunity for diversity of housing, various housing types and communities, so we can have a comprehensive community. And it comes down to, we want to really make sure that the processes are streamlined so we can encourage redevelopment, which we see being a major development as we go forward with our city.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
On the form-based code, just as a comment to that, I think that's where we can see the flexibility on a property, especially when it comes to strip malls or things like that. They're like one zoning, and they get kind of stuck because whatever was working there in that zoning isn't working any longer, and it just sits vacant or very little use. So I think it has those opportunities, like you mentioned, looking those from the ground up, the smaller opportunities where you can take a property and then start breaking it down and say, this is the form it needs to be, but it can have a housing development element in it. It can have, these different elements in it to make it more cohesive to the surrounding area and productive again. So I think that's another, a good thing about the form-based code, that we can have the flexibility on a property for it to develop to today's needs and the surrounding community.
Back to you.
So we know that this is a strategic priority for council in the next year, but through our efforts, through this team's efforts in developing general plan, transportation plan, transit plan, there's been a lot of public comment that has shown that redevelopment is a top priority throughout the city, not just in the downtown area. So this is aligning with what our public wants to see as well. This group is going to continue to work together, and we're going to start bringing other people into the working group so that we can come back to council with some priorities, some opportunity sites, and some strategic initiatives and programs that we can then bring together. As was Chris mentioned last week in the budget overview, we are requesting 2 FTEs to be included in the fiscal year 24-25 budget. You might have already guessed, given his role today, that Mr. Robbins has been tagged as our future redevelopment program manager, and then we will be looking to hire another position. As Mr. Brady also mentioned last week, my team will have to kind of change its focus. The office will have to kind of change its focus from downtown transformation to something different. I'm not going to say that this. I'm not going to say that this is our new department title, but our working title now is the Office of Urban Transformation, with a working group on downtown and a working group on redevelopment.
And so, Mayor and Council, the goal here is, the purpose of this is going forward now, since the transition of the general plan, Mr. Robbins will be, to your point, if there's, where's opportunities for infill, that's kind of his role, right, is to be in contact to assess working with other departments, but he is the contact. If someone you hear in a small lot, large development, whatever, has some interest, or you think there's an opportunity for us to literally reach out to the property owner and go to them and say, hey, we know this, this property's been sitting here underutilized, vacant, whatever, and you would see that there may be an opportunity. Jeff and his staff will then, Mr. Robbins will work to make that contact and begin that opportunity to have that dialogue and assess what can we create the process, because redevelopment really is it's a customized approach for every property. And I think that's the wisdom of creating individuals that are just doing that. And so I think whether it's large or small, we need to have that primary contact and that perspective of infill. So that's what we're trying to achieve here, but recognizing, just like, and I'll emphasize this over and over again, within this city, we do not do things by ourselves in one department. It does not happen. Because then when that happens, we create silos. So you can see that's why we create working groups and we try to collaborate. Now we need the lead to pull everything together and keep it coordinated and keep the projects moving. So that's what Mr. Robbins will do. So that's where our intention is going forward.
You go ahead.
I already gave a lot of my comments about this last week, so I'm very excited about this. Mr. Robbins, you just do everything, don't you? He's the guy. So I'm super excited. I get overwhelmed sometimes when I drive around my district because I've never made a list. I guess I should make a list. There's just so many areas that could use some help. And like I mentioned last week, it's hard because I can only do so much as a council member, but for example, I have a couple of specific properties in my district that I have tried to access the property owner to say, what are you doing? Why are you letting it look like this? And it's just really problematic for that whole area. And I have a hard time getting to anyone, especially if it's like a really large property owner, right? So, I mean, is that something your department is then going to help with to try to work on those specific like property owners? Another one is the Cross Power from there. The infamous car wash that's just boarded up now that was in the presentation last week. So I mean, there's warrant out for the arrest of the property owners, but like, does that just have to sit there? I know. It's just like what?
Again, the council
I know it's just a process, but in the meantime, that area just gets more blighted and more blighted.
But again, we will do everything we can, whether it's code, whether it's the infill and try to incentivize it.
There's still only so much we can do.
Anywhere, right? There's still boundaries on private property,
yes,
rights
absolutely.
and ownership. And unfortunately, some property owners can allow properties to go be used that way unless there's an eminent public safety, or not public safety, public safety concern.
Yeah.
Aesthetic is not always a reason for us it's like, how far can the city push? Now, we will do everything we can to, whether it's through code to incentivize, through penalties or other types of incentives.
Right.
We will make contact and do all those things, but we all have to recognize, I often have citizens, why don't you go in and take over that property? And I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something, using that kind of power of government is not something we take very lightly. And many of these properties don't raise that threshold that justify us doing it. But, so we're trying to use all these other means to try to have those discussions.
I guess that's why I brought it up, because the point being that even with like 2 new full-time employees and there's still only so much we can do on some of these properties.
For some of those problematic properties, you're probably correct, but I think there's plenty to do.
Okay.
I don't think he's gonna be bored.
No, well, that's what I mean. Like, I mean.
And if to a point where we are getting, these things start rolling in and we're seeing a lot of success, I think we would come back and say we need more of, right? Because if we figured out the cadence of how to get in and work with these property owners and get things done, we wouldn't be afraid to do it. Because as Jeff was showing, Mr. Robbins was showing, the value return to the city, is real. And so if we can improve that underutilized property, that blighted property. And not only affects that property, as you all know, it affects everything around it.
Absolutely, which so then affects the neighborhoods, which I
Right.
care about for their well-being and their safety and stuff. So, because that Power Road corridor, I mean, it's dropping like flies. It's bad, and that needs to stay a nice, well-kept, safe area, since that just, anyways, we don't need to, talk about specific things, I guess. But I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys are able to do, and we'll just start making my list, I guess.
Yeah,
So,
please.
thank you.
Yes, please.
So, so glad to have Jeff reassigned to this. I'm really happy about that. But are you just working in RDA areas or infill citywide? What is your role or?
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, my assignment is to facilitate redevelopment and infill. And definitely those areas are a focus, but they are not the only focus.
So you're not limited to
He's citywide.
RDA?
He's
It'll be
citywide.
citywide.
But the RDAs create a unique opportunity for us, so we don't want to bypass that opportunity, but certainly anything outside the RDAs we're looking at. I mean, Jay's having conversations with Superstition Springs, that's not in an RDA, so.
Right, great, wonderful. And so one of our council priorities is around placemaking. So is this the solution for that, or is there a bigger conversation?
I think this relates to it, but I think we need to have that
Okay,
conversation too.
okay, great. Now that, Jeff, you were in planning, right, budget? Now you're going
Development
to-
services.
Okay, you're kind of your own budget. Then, giving placemaking in the RDAs, can we get an urban planner to help with these in a position?
That's Mary. So we don't want to create, ultimately, they all have to come together, right? It's
Right.
placing, an auditor in every department isn't, we have expertise in planning.
No, I'm
So
saying
the strength of planning will
broader-
be part of the conversation here.
Planning, it wouldn't be just, I'm not talking about RDA being an element, but not everything.
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, clearly we've built a really strong relationship with Jeff that everybody thinks he's in planning. He's actually in development services. He's just been our
okay.
project manager for the
Okay.
general plan.
All right.
We'll continue that relationship with him, so when there's a planning aspect of the infill project, we'll work really closely with Jeff on that. So we've got the long-range planning team, we've got our current planners, so depending on what the task is for that infill site, we'll work really closely with Jeff on those.
So we'll have a separate presentation around placemaking? Okay, and then I'll argue for the urban planner there. So, designer, I'm not planner, but designer.
Yeah, and
I'm
what I
sorry.
need,
We
council,
have
I know
planners.
what it is we're doing, because that is what Mary does, right? Mary is the director of planning. It doesn't make sense for me to go put planners all
Well,
over the
I
city.
didn't mean
If
I'm a
ultimately the
designer.
final decision that goes to planning and zoning is coming from the planning director. It doesn't come from another department, it comes from the planning director. It's even in the charter, it's like the only position, one of the few positions that actually mentioned specifically outside of the ones that report to you is the planning director. So I hesitate to, do something or have some group or person doing something that's not connected. Now, if we need to have, we need to talk about the specific designation of someone in her group that is a urban planner, designer, I'm not sure what that is, then that's what'll fall to Mary.
Yeah,
Right, I think that's
did mean
what- yeah.
that, and I didn't present that very well, but I meant in the planning department, a designer that looks at placemaking, which is totality, other than just abiding by an ordinance, what is the place that we're creating? And also, I'll throw it back in, transportation being part of, whether it's RDA or the placemaking, looking at the land use and pulling that all together, so we're not trying to create places without also looking at the streets. So that's got to be part of the group or the discussion.
And I guess we need to do a better job of sharing with council. Staff believes, when I go talk to staff, they say, we're doing this. We're doing this. They all sit at the table and have this conversation. So maybe we just need to do a better job of explaining that process that takes place when development comes in and the conversation that's happening with a variety of disciplines at the table and just making sure we've designated someone who's fulfilling that role. But staff feels like when they have those conversations on a regular basis, that's what's happening, right?
Well, I mean, from what I've been observing, Chris, obviously a lot less than you, though, the planning director is not looking at the community as a whole. They're looking at the parcel. I mean, Mary and I've had these discussions where it's.
I hope not. That's not the
But, well,
conversations I
it's-
have with her.
It's very technical. Does this check the technical requirements?
No, she is not. Yeah.
And-
Wow, that's,
Obviously, and.
that'd be unfortunate if I had a planning director
Does
who
it-
looked at it that way.
Does it satisfy the general plan in that sense? But broadly speaking, as it affects other areas in the community, I mean, I've been told, I look at the technical aspects. If it satisfies that, it's recommended.
So Councilmember Goforth, Mayor Giles, I think that what we look at, so there's a lot of different levels of planning. There's a site plan, there's a regional plan, and then obviously something like the general plan. The general plan is looking at the entire city. And when we're putting that general plan together, we're looking at how all those pieces of the city come together. So any detailed site plan, first thing we look at is the general plan, because that's laying the foundation and the framework for how the city is developing as a whole. Then we look at any of the sub-area plans that there may or may not be for an area. So the Citrus area, we've got the Lehigh Valley sub-area plan. So we look at that. And then what we do is we kind of funnel down from the general plan down to that site plan. When we're looking at the specific site plan, what we're looking at is the zoning code. Does it meet setbacks, heights, and all of those things? But as City Manager Mr. Brady said, what we do is we have meetings every week with all of the various departments in the city where those projects, when they come in, we discuss them. So planning, the case planner is going to look at the specifics as it relates to the zoning code. Transportation is going to look at it as it relates to the transportation aspects. And we discuss those pieces and how they fit together. Water Resources is going to look in terms of infrastructure, and that's where Robert Apodaca, he helps to coordinate that with all of our infrastructure and engineering type of departments. Fire looks at it. So we've got all of these departments in that meeting weekly looking at the specific site plan, but a specific site plan is not just the type, that's not the only planning that we're doing in the planning division, which is why we look at, in the long-range team, those broader policy type of questions and how the city as a whole comes together.
Mary, may I add, and economic development is also in those meetings as well.
I missed you, Jay, sorry. Economic development is a very important part of this equation too. And I appreciate that you are working with all the departments and you're looking. I just want an overarching, like, urban designer, I should say, rather than a planner, who's like, my box is checked, how about yours? Is your box checked? Oh, we're all in agreement, our boxes are checked. When we're trying, if in what we're trying to create in that area is placemaking, the streets, the landscaping, the access, all these different elements, are they coming together to create a place? Are they creating a cohesive place and having that expertise? Yes, we have the expertise of an engineer and a planner and fire and trash and all these, but do we have an expert in urban design to make sure this is all coming together for a place? And I know we'll have a placemaking discussion and we can get into it, and I know you're looking forward to it.
Well, I'm struggling with, I don't know what broader the full council's looking for, right? Because I think when you say that sounds very project specific, right? I mean, we have that, but when we get a zoning for, a parcel, right? I mean, yes, we look in the context in which it sits within that area, but the built environment exists, right? So when we say placemaking, I'm thinking of specifically connecting significant activity centers in the city, and most likely, we're having those conversations at Fiesta, right? We're having those kind of conversations. We have this other side of it is the private sector developer coming in. We're trying to work with them in the context of what they want. We're trying to push them to other, our standards, but I'm struggling with I think I rely upon planning and Mary and her folks to tell, does this fit in the context of this part of the city, within the vision of the city? And that's, I don't know if we don't really design other people's projects, right? We share with them values and visions and try to encourage them to incorporate those, but we don't rewrite their architecture. We don't rewrite their internal streets. We give them ideas and share that with them, but we don't impose a city staff person to sit down and rewrites a private sector development. It's a collaborative, persuasive conversation that we go through. Because that has never been, I've never seen anybody in the government take on the idea of redesigning developers' proposals.
Well, it's more on placemaking, like, we'll say the Asian district, right? It's all these different property owners coming together and pulling that, like economic development has done, pulling those owners together and start talking about the place and what is our place as a city. Is when we're reviewing those plans, we're making sure it's achieving the overarching, and our streets are going to provide that, and we're getting some housing in there. How can we make this like an area where I'm going to the Asian district, and be able to walk from property to property? You're creating a place. Fiesta, we're creating a place, but Fiesta is more than just Fiesta Mall. There's the surrounding properties. So that's a place. So where are these placemaking opportunities? I can see these natural, Riverview's another place that we've attempted to make a place, but we really haven't, because we only made it some retail. And now we're getting to have that vision of these places that are a mixed-use environment and creating a sense of place. So no, I'm not trying to achieve placemaking on every corner, but places, Superstition is another area that could come together as a place and have placemaking where it all fits together and it's not just silo property, silo property, silo property, if that makes sense. Just the visioning in these areas that makes, anyway. We'll get placemaking later.
Great. This has been a great discussion, but Jeff.
Do you want some more?
Well, let me just warn you, there's going to be a lot of meetings with council members because I think we've all got our list of the broken windows, in Mesa that we'd like to see upgraded. So today's a great time for those discussions. And Mr. Brady and everyone, thank you for listening during our strategic planning session and for being responsive in creating this dream team to address this strategic priority that the council is obviously very interested in pursuing. Mr. Freeman.
Well, since you're all here, listening to my colleagues talk, one of the things that, as I drive our city streets, arterial streets, is our infill development and our underperforming shopping centers. And I know Nana and Jeff, we've talked about this for years. And, there's a common denominator. I was thinking about all the shopping centers on University Road or Avenue from Dobson, Alma School, Extension, Gilbert Road, which other ones? Val Vista, Greenfield, Recker. So our common denominator is University. And so reaching out to ownership there, I think is crucial to Councilmember Spilsbury and Goforth and Duff's comments. These underperforming shopping centers are affecting our neighborhoods. They're affecting our quality of life and the character of Mesa. And we need to uplift that. And so how do we do that is something that you've identified the Broadway corridor. Well, let's extend it to, a mile north to the University corridor and call it that. And then work with ownership, reach out to them, just send them letters. And, Jeff's our point of contact, apparently. He does it all. But they just need to know what infill development might be opportunity for them. I don't know how to explain it. But yeah, we can all reach out in our respective districts and give you a whole list, and you'll be inundated with that. But shopping centers are a common theme in each of our districts. I mean, I can go to Lindsay in Maine. I can go to further on to Power Road on Main Street. So I think as you look outside this downtown area, there's a lot of RDA that can happen in our respective areas and uplift all of our districts. So I just think that as we identify these areas, don't be afraid to reach out to these areas and reach out and contact that ownership. And we can do that as council members. I'm not afraid to do that. It's just, in fact, I was talking to ownership at Record Maine. I know you want the button.
No.
But they said, my intent now is to lease out all of my buildings in this shopping center, and I'm selling and getting out of Mesa. That's what he told me. I'm tired of Mesa. And that was hard to hear. And I tried to talk, well, why is that? Well, because it's an underperforming area at Main Street and Record to 64th Street, and it wasn't very productive for them. They just want to lease up everything, sell their shopping center and be gone. So I'll end with that, but those are some of the things that I've heard feedback.
That is a Buckhorn Bass issue, just so we can call it the elephant in the room. We need to figure out Buckhorn Bass, so because that's affecting that whole area. Main and Record. Anyways, and we can't just make every shopping center that's run down into multifamily housing either. So just throw that out there too, because that tends to be what we're doing, which we need more housing and stuff, but we need to look at things other than multifamily housing, because that's not what those neighborhoods want. My district is full of neighborhoods. People live in my district, lots and lots and lots of people in neighborhoods, and they still want good places to shop and places to eat. And I mean, you all know this, so thanks.
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, Councilmember Spilsbury, I think one of the things I'd like to convey is that what we've learned in downtown, and Jay knows this as well, is that this isn't easy work. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience. You have to form relationships with people, and I think one of the best experiences that we've had is that once some of these property owners realize that there is a team at the city that's ready to help them get to the next level, that they are more willing to work with us. And I don't know that we're going to solve every shopping district, and I've only got I don't know how much years left, but we are going to start on making and forming those relationships. Jeff's not going to have an easy job, and it's going to take all of us to be able to come to the table and show that the city is a willing participant as well. To come to them and say, here's what we've built as programs and incentives to help you, reimagine your property. And I think that hopefully when we come back and present what our priorities are, you're going to see some of those ideas coming forward, some of those ways that we can start engaging with these property owners. And Councilmember Freeman, it could be as simple as, let's just send them a letter to say, hey, did you know you're in an RDA? We have a working group here today to help you out. Would you like to have a conversation with us about what could be the future of your property? It could be as simple as that, just to get the ball rolling. And then we have the team that we can bring to them to help them work on it.
Thank you.
All right, this is very exciting. Thank you, Council. Any additional questions?
Fix every problem in the city.
Well, I would just say,
We need to clone all of you.
yeah, if anybody can get it done, it's the four. I mean, we have a lot to say about a lot of things, but I think the one grateful thing that we have is that we have the four of you working on this collaboratively, and there's nobody better in the Valley. I honestly believe that than this team. So I know I'm excited for the great things that'll happen. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. All right, moving on. Next item on our agenda, item 2, is to acknowledge receipt of a board meeting minutes. Is there a motion to that effect? Thank you, Mr. Freeman and Ms. Spilsbury. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That passes unanimously. Item 3 is current events and conferences attended. Council members, who would like to go first? Julie?
It's so late. I just to recognize our Mesa Police Department had their awards and promotions. Almost all of us were there, and that was a great event to see what's happening there and all of the promotions. They highlighted class of the 22nd academy that went through, I guess would be the way to say it. So it's been 20 years, so they highlighted all of them. And so that was just fun to see what they've done in the last 20 years since they've been part of the academy, and the great ways they're contributing to our city. So I really appreciated that. That's all I'll say.
Great, thank you. Council? Ms. Duff?
Yes, I want to mention that I had attended an event in the Yard in downtown Mesa on McDonald. It's Coffee with Council. So thank you to the Delta Hotel for providing coffee and pastries, and the DMA for arranging it. It's just an impromptu conversation, so with whoever shows up. I want to thank Councilmember Summers for joining me on Tuesday for those conversations that are very rich in learning more about our community. I also want to bring up that I received the best postcard in the mail yesterday is Let's Talk About West Mesa. It is our transit-oriented development plan called Mesa Connected. It's talking about the streetcar, and is a quick survey, I'd say less than 5 minutes, just to ask what's important to you along this streetcar corridor. So there's a QR code to do the survey. There are some meetings, one in person on April 11th, and some virtual meetings on the 13th, 16th. Oh, another in-person meeting on the 17th. Anyway, I'm sure if you're in the West Mesa, you look for this postcard in your mailbox and be involved in the conversation and reshaping what West Mesa looks like. It's an exciting opportunity around the streetcar. Thank you.
Thank you. That's important. I think there's some misinformation out there about where the streetcar is going and what it's doing, and so we need to do as much outreach on that as we can. Other comments, council? I'll just say I got back last night from 2 days in Washington, D.C., working on the electric vehicle working group, and I really appreciated the opportunity to be the elected official on that national effort. And we approved an interim report, and there'll be more reports coming out, but it's been, Mesa is getting talked about, and I think we're at the national level, and hopefully we'll continue to be good examples in encouraging and adoption of electric vehicles and responding to the challenges and the opportunities that are there. Next, so that completes, Mr. Brady, what does our schedule of future meetings look like?
Thank you, Mayor. We get to do this again next Thursday. So we'll now move into utilities. So we'll have those presentations. We also anticipate that we'll be having an executive session that on April 11th regarding the city magistrate. So we'll get that information to you as soon as we have it. Reminder, Cyclo Mesa is this Saturday, April 6th from 9 to 2. We had a great, I think Councilmember Summers would tell you, we had a really good turnout last night at the first Building Mesa's Future open house out at Eastmark High School cafeteria. We had a large group of residents show up, very interested in the projects that we had. We have one tonight at the Post, and so we look forward to that. And then we've got more scheduled next week that we can talk about. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. That concludes our agenda. Council, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, Ms. Pillsbury. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.